Of 4 September. Right, we have apologies from Councillor Brewer, Deputy Chairperson Councillor Clow, Deputy Mayor, Councillor Penrose, Councillor Wood, and lateness for Councillor Quacks and Cooper. I'll move those apologies. John Watson sitting in front of me right now. Councillor and I. Thank you. All those in favour? Against? Carried. Thank you. Declarations of interest. There were no declarations. Oh yes, there is a declaration of interest for Councillor and I on item number 13. Thank you. Any other declarations of interest? No. Confirmation of minutes of the 20th of August.
Happy to move.
Thank you. Moved by Councillor Walker, seconded by Councillor Filipina. All those in favour? Against? Carried. Thank you. There are no petitions, no public input. I had one local board request from member Bergen, who wanted to come and tell us what a very good job we were doing. I reluctantly said it probably wasn't necessary at that stage, but it was always nice to have local board chairs telling us we're doing a good job. And a request from Paul Malden from Waiheke. However, he's going to come to next month's meeting, so thank you. There's no notice of motion or extraordinary business, but we do have to move precedent of business for item 15, which we are going to bring forward. That seconded by Councillor Fletcher. All those in favour?
Aye.
Against? Carried. Thank you. So, right, councillors, we will move to item 15. I'd like to invite Paul Callow to the table. Paul is an ex-partner of Deloitte's and led their infrastructure sector group for 12 years. He is now providing independent consulting advice, and this was, as you remember, a request from some councillors for a comparison document to be done independently on the rail costs between Auckland. Well timed.
Should we go to Kapa? ATS Centre.
Someone doesn't like this report.
Just to practice.
Introducing Paul. So, and as I said, this independent review was requested during the LTP deliberations by a few councillors, so that's why we have it on the agenda for today. So over to you, Paul. Thank you.
Okay, can we get my presentation up on the screen for... Thanks very much. Well, the alarm trick didn't work, so I guess I'll have to do the presentation after all. Okay, my name's Paul Callow. I'm an independent consultant. I was engaged by Auckland Council to review the rail costs in Auckland, compare them with the costs for Wellington, and also to look at the funding and fares recovery ratios and the differences in those between the two cities. The report, I understand, has been circulated to the committee, so the purpose of this presentation is just to provide a brief summary of the key points in the report and an opportunity for the councillors to ask questions, should they have any. So very briefly, agenda, I'll just run through the scope of the review, my terms of reference, the key findings, talk briefly about the network and service comparison that sits behind the work that I did, the financial analysis that supports that, and then the fares and funding analysis that was a slightly separate exercise, and then a few recommendations that come out of the work that I did. So the review is based, first important thing to notice, is based on 2014 financial year, the reason being, that's the year to June 2014. The reason for that being, that was the most recent information that was available for both cities at the time the review was carried out. Compares the networks and, more importantly, the services run over those networks in the two cities. I was asked to develop financial metrics to establish and compare the efficiency and cost effectiveness of the delivery of services between the two cities. I then also looked at the differences in funding between the two cities, which is essentially a close look at the fares policies between the two, because essentially the fare cover is driven by the fares you set, the balance being met by a mixture of NZTA and rates funding. So the scope of so first of all, the key conclusions, get straight to the point. Auckland runs a more comprehensive service timetable than Wellington, and it services more stations at a greater frequency. When I talk about the services in more detail, I'll explain what's behind that. But essentially, Auckland runs more trains to more stations more often, and clearly there's a cost to that, which is the primary driver of the difference in costs between Auckland and Wellington, and that is essentially labour, maintenance, and in the case of 2014, fuel costs. Auckland also has lower fares than Wellington. The fare structures are very similar, but the actual fare outcomes, the average fare per head, is much lower, and I'll explain the reasons for that in the rest of the presentation. There are also a number of other factors which were not present in Auckland, which weren't present in Wellington, some of which will persist and some of which won't. I'll just run through what those are as well. They were more aggravating factors than the primary cause of the higher expense in Auckland. Adjusting for the differences in service levels and adjusting for the factors present in Auckland, I'll take you through what those adjustments were. There's really no material difference in the cost effectiveness of delivery of services in Auckland versus Wellington. The reason for the extra cost is you deliver more of them to more stations in Auckland than Wellington. And also those cost effectiveness measures will improve significantly in Auckland in 2016, being the first year of full EMU operation, so things are going to get considerably better. So briefly, let's have a look at the networks. The networks are remarkably similar. Both have 4 lines serving a single central terminus. One of those lines in each city is essentially a branch of one of the major lines, and both have 2 lines that carry the bulk of the traffic, which I'll talk about in a minute. The number of stops is very similar, 49 versus 42. The only major difference is the overall length of the Wellington network is about 40% greater than the overall length of the Auckland network, which is slightly more compact, so distance between stops is slightly less in Auckland versus Wellington. But other than that, it would be hard to find two more similar networks to compare. The major difference is the services that are run on those networks, which is the main driver of cost. So just looking at Wellington first, the two busiest lines are the Paraparaumu line and the Hutt Valley line. And the service patterns on those through the morning peak, which is the main driver of the financial outcomes for the rail service, are essentially in two halves. There's one service, what they call an express service, that serves the outer half of the stations and then provides a non-stopping service from halfway into Wellington. And then there's a stopping service, which is much shorter, which basically picks up, just runs back and forth along the inner half of the line. Essentially, those are at best 20-minute frequency during the peak period, and slightly less in some cases. And so the services are shorter and effectively run in two halves. Contrast that with Auckland, and just looking at the two main lines being the Western and the Southern, every service stops at every station, and the services run through the peak on a 15-minute frequency, and that's going to change to expected to change to a 10-minute frequency once the EMUs are commissioned. So you're stopping at all stations on every line, and you're running a 15-minute frequency. So clearly, you need more trains, more people to do that, and that's clear. That's what drives the major difference in cost between the two cities. So, looking at the other factors that were present in Auckland, which were not present in Wellington, the first one is a thing called dead running. And dead running is basically the time cost of moving trains from where they're stored overnight to the place where they start service in the morning. In Auckland, you have depots at Wirri and Westfield, which are halfway along the line. So before you can start service in the morning, you've got to move the train into the central terminus or out, or in some cases, into the central terminus and out along one of the lines that doesn't have a depot situated along it. In Wellington, there is no dead running. Essentially, all the trains are stabled at the main terminus, and some of those train repositioning services are actually run as timetabled services. So if you look at the Wellington timetables, if you want to go from Wellington out to the end of the Hutt Valley line at 5 o'clock in the morning, 5:30 in the morning, you're actually quite well served. There's an express service, which is actually a train repositioning movement. So night watchmen and shift workers are very well served. I'm not sure it's a terribly heavily patronised service. Fleet age, clearly during 2014, Auckland was operating a very elderly fleet of diesels and of refurbished carriages of relatively old design. That had two factors. One is the age creates a maintenance burden, and the second is diesels are inherently more expensive to maintain than electric EMUs, as we're finding with the EMUs that are being introduced. Train capacity, Auckland's fleet is in 2014 was of generally quite an old design, configured for 66 seats in a carriage versus the EMUs in Wellington that are 78, and the new EMUs here I think are something similar. So essentially to provide a given capacity you have to provide more carriages, which clearly creates a cost burden certainly in terms of maintenance. I also had a close look at staffing practices between the two cities, and despite the fact that there are differences around ticket collection, the overall staffing practices on trains are not materially different. So the reason for having a much higher staffing cost in Auckland versus Wellington is not because you've got more people on the trains, it's because you're running more services. In order to make a fair comparison between the two, I started with the memorandum for 18th of February that went to the board. There were a number of corrections that, or adjustments that were made to that number, both that and the Wellington numbers. The Wellington numbers included internal staff costs of somewhere over 7 million. So those were removed. The Auckland numbers didn't include internal staff costs, so the Wellington numbers came down. The Auckland numbers, there was a double count of security costs which was adjusted for. There were also ticketing costs which were included in Wellington's number but not in the Auckland numbers, so the Auckland numbers were increased by the ticketing costs. And the Auckland numbers also included a interest charge which was a capital nature, and what we were looking at purely was operational costs here, which was backed out. So that got you to 131 versus 0.5 versus 77.8, like for like, counting the same things as far as we're able to identify them. Then what I did was I took the 2014 costs, and what I tried to do was back out the transitional issues. 2014 was a year in which Auckland Transport was introducing a new fleet and was running a diesel fleet versus an electric fleet in Wellington. So what I've done is corrected for those, and that correction is probably conservative in as much as there were probably other costs I couldn't identify that didn't back out. There were several items there. The first was obviously diesel costs, so I backed the cost of diesel out, so we're comparing like with like. I backed out the cost of 18 drivers under training who were training to run the EMUs, which was a transitional issue in that year, and also backed out $1 million from the driver roster. Talking to the operator, they have to carry extra drivers because at the time 2 different diesel fleets were being run, and the drivers couldn't operate both, couldn't move from one to the other, and they estimate they carried about an extra $1 million of cost in that. So backing those out, that effectively gets said that like for like, if you were running a reasonably modern fleet, electric fleet, in a steady state in Auckland in 2014, it would have cost you about 114 million, like for like with Wellington. Then what I did was develop efficiency measures. Now the main drivers of cost in rail services are the provision of services themselves. So your costs are your staff to drive the train, your staff to collect tickets, the maintenance of the trains, and the kilometres run, which drives your maintenance costs. So it's basically hours, number of services, and kilometres run. Passengers do not drive your operating costs to any major extent. More passengers means you incur some additional cleaning and minor operational costs, but you have to. If you decide to run a schedule, you run that schedule whether you've got 1 passenger or whether you've got 11 million. So what I've tried to do in terms of measuring the efficiency is saying what drives the costs and how are you performing against those measures. So I then took the adjusted costs, divided them by the weekly operating hours, and came up with a cost which was around about 7% difference between Auckland and Wellington, and that's probably the most reliable efficiency measure because those hours include all the dead running hours, which is about 5% of your total hours. The weekly services, I actually adjusted the service base in Wellington because clearly a 22-minute service that only serves 7 stations is not equivalent to 1-for-1 with a 1-hour service that serves all the stations, all 18 stations on a line. And on a service equivalent basis, the difference looks quite large there, but what I wasn't unable to do was I didn't put in any service measures for the dead running, and there are about 16,000 train movements which are dead running. If you treat each of those as a half service, which I think is reasonably conservative, so you're saying it runs half the length of the line in cost terms, then that difference falls to around about 7%. So those first 2 measures suggest that within the limits of the accuracy of what we're able to do, there's no material difference between the efficiency of provision and the cost of provision of services and operating hours. Seat kilometres is there is a reasonably significant difference. That is largely down to the fact that the configuration of the Auckland fleet, which we couldn't adjust for, is pretty old. I mean, they're old UK carriages that have been refurbished, as I understand, and so you need to run more of them. So that measure is not a particularly reliable indicator of the relative efficiency of provision, and that will change significantly when the new EMU fleet is fully operational, and will probably fall below. Is forecast to fall below the Wellington number. The second part of the engagement was funding and fares, and so I looked at the headline numbers. The Auckland fares, the average fare per passenger, revenue divided by number of passengers, was 372, about 40% higher than Auckland. Now, there was a number of reasons that could be the case. Differences in fare structures, which I looked at, measurement differences, and a point to note there is Auckland HOP data actually enables very accurate measurement of patronage. You know exactly how many paying passengers have travelled from where and to where, so that was very useful in this exercise. Wellington still uses station blockades and passenger counts, which used to be used in Auckland. When Auckland compared its blockade data with its HOP data, it found that the blockade data was overestimating patronage by a reasonably significant amount. And I just point out Wellington claimed theirs is accurate. What I would say is take the opportunity to thank the Wellington guys who were very helpful in providing information for this this study. They took me through the publicly available information, and they also provided additional information which was extremely helpful. Fare evasion, depending very much on how you treat fare evaders, could be a reason for the difference, or essentially differences in fare levels. The table at the bottom there just takes you through the differences in fare revenues, and Auckland's is significantly lower for the same number of passengers. The reason, as I mentioned in the up front in the key points, is the fare structures are actually very similar. They're distance-based sections. The difference in terms of fare outcomes and average fares is that in Wellington, it's not physically possible to do a commuting journey of 1 or 2 sections. So what happens is the same fare structure ends up with quite different average fare outcomes. The services on 3 of the 4 lines actually don't stop in a 1 or 2 section stop, because there aren't any, or there's one and they don't stop at it. So essentially what that does is put a floor on the fares for almost all the Wellington lines for the commuter services of around $5.50. Whereas in Auckland, what you have is a very short trip network. You have almost 1 million trips of 1 or 2 sections, a lot of which are between Newmarket and Britomart. And when you look at the average fares on your eastern and southern and western lines, you've got an average fare of about $6. On the Kapiti line, because of that floor, you end up with an average fare of $9, which is about 55% higher. Yeah. And on the Hutt Valley, you've got a fare of around $7.90, which is around 35% higher. And that's the bulk of your commuter traffic. So you can see there the actual fare itself is the main reason for the difference in revenues. You've got the difference in revenues is about 40%. The difference in your average fares through the commuter period is around about the same. So briefly, conclusions. As I've mentioned already, Auckland runs a more comprehensive timetable, more services to more stations than Wellington, and is going to continue to increase, and that's the primary driver of operational costs, the provision of trains, the provision of services, and the time they take to run. The primary reason for the lower fares is that the fares are lower, the fare levels are lower. It's not a structural issue, it's not an evasion issue. The average fares are around about 40% lower, and the average revenue is about the same difference. There is certainly greater scope for evasion in Auckland than Wellington, given there are quite different fare practices or fare improvement practices, and that I've talked about in my recommendations. Although there's undoubtedly evasion in both cities, that's not the primary material factor in the difference in revenues and consequently fare recoveries between the 2 cities. And bear in mind that a lot of those fare evaders, some of whom I had the pleasure to meet when travelling around the network here, actually haven't got any money. There does seem to be a rather strange culture where people seem to travel around on the train because they've got nothing much else to do.
We should shout them. Train spots and cigarettes.
You are shouting them at the moment by the provision of the train service, I guess, because it's treated as a free good by people with nothing much else to do. And my sense is that if you put in place a meaningful penalty for free riding, then these people will just disappear. So in that sense, it's not lost revenue, but it is a bad example. I'll come to that in the conclusions. And I guess the point is Auckland has invested a significant amount in both its fleet and the infrastructure around the network in the expectation that patronage is going to increase. And the most important thing really is to make sure that patronage does increase and monitor that quite closely. And effectively you're investing in a service pattern that's expected to drive greater levels of patronage. So just briefly coming to the recommendations, strictly speaking this wasn't part of the brief, but I was asked to share any good practice or useful points that I came across that I thought might be helpful as pointers that could be shared to help improve the financials of the network up here. The first one is levels of discount to HOP customers. The biggest discounts are actually on the shortest fares. So whilst your one section fare is $2.50, most people only pay $1.80 because you give them a 30% discount. Once people get onto a new product, they tend to be quite sticky, so as long as it remains cheaper than buying a paper ticket, they would likely continue to use it. The question is whether those discount levels remain appropriate, having got through that establishment period and got quite high levels of hop card adoption. Third-party revenues, the station infrastructure in Britomart and other parts of the network is quite modern here compared to Auckland, to Wellington. And the retail footprints in the Wellington main station are quite different to up here and probably drive greater value. That's certainly something I think would be worth looking at, the ability of third-party revenues to offset some of your costs. I think there's probably room for improvement there. The role of the train manager, it's a kind of an unusual role. It's present in both Wellington and Auckland, but you don't see it on other trains. Including that, within that role, ticket inspection would seem to me to be a low-cost way of helping to reduce revenue leakage and improve enforcement. But if you're going to enforce, you really need something to enforce. And I think establishing some meaningful penalties for what is essentially theft or fraud in some form would be sensible. As I understand at the moment, the only thing you can do is throw them off the train if they'll actually leave, and try to impose a penalty fare if you can actually persuade them to pay it. So it's pretty toothless compared to some other networks in London Underground, for example. If you're caught evading fares, you go to jail. Which I'm sure...
You've got no money anyway.
No, but you can always lock them up, though, I suppose.
You must have interviewed them.
I did. Well, they interviewed me, actually. It's a very interesting conversation. But they clearly weren't going to be paying for anything anytime soon. And they also gave me some hints on how to avoid fares myself, which I hadn't.
Clear of the retail section.
Well, apparently, it was an interesting point that the roving ticket inspectors do wear bright fluorescent vests, and they're very easy to spot. So what these guys did was just basically sit on the station until the train came past with no fluoro vests in it, and they just got on it because they knew that the train manager wasn't going to do anything. And when they saw fluoro vests at the next station, they got off. Like I say, it's a game, really. So making them, there's a number of things that could be done there to basically get these people off the network, because they're providing some bad press, if nothing else. So that's really a summary of my report.
Thank you.
I'm happy to take any questions if that's the way this works.
Questions, councillors? Comments? Councillor Lee.
Thank you very much. Just to go back to the beginning, you referred to a memo to the Auckland Transport Board in February 2015. Are you aware that the resolution which authorised your report was based on a separate memo to the Mayor and the councillors? You don't seem to mention that because it is quite significant, of 7th of May 2015. The memo to the board was a confidential memo, but the one to the council which authorised your report was not. So, and that was dated 7th of May 2015. There are some slight differences between the two memos, but it's interesting that you focused on the one to the Auckland Transport Board. That didn't authorise your investigation at all. I'll just make that point. When you say you talk about fares, are you talking about fares? You're saying the fares in Auckland are lower. Are you talking about fares received or ticket prices?
Talking about the fares received.
Okay, well, that's the whole problem. We were aware of that. So there's a kind of a tautology there on the basis of investigating why fares are lower, that come up with a finding that fares are lower.
Well, the fares are lower because the same structure delivers a lower fare. People take shorter journeys and you charge them a lower fare for it. That's essentially the difference.
You're saying that the fare structure is similar, and I guess when it comes to the ticket prices, the few cents depending on the sections. But the fares received are lower.
The fare structure is the same. The fares received are lower because it's the same structure.
That's our problem.
The same structure delivers a different fare outcome in Wellington and Auckland because you've got a floor in the Wellington. You've got a minimum fare of $5.50, which is the main difference.
You talk about the the cost differences are modest between the two operations. I don't want to get picky about figures, but on your page, is it 135 in the agenda report, 9 on you've got a table, a helpful table of figures set out there, and you give the Auckland total operational expenditure is 125.669 million. And you've explained how you've worked that through, but of course, in the Auckland Transport rail operations for the 12 months ended 30th of June 2014, we have 139.285 million. I don't want to go into that, but I'll just make that point. Let's come back to your figures, because you seem to have brushed over it, because we're looking for something that's significant here. I guess that's the motivation. The disparity in cost and revenue is so significant that the council, unanimously led by the Mayor, felt there needed to be some sort of investigation. But let's look at a significant difference that you seem to have brushed over. Labour, Auckland 43.216 million, Labour, Wellington 25.436 million. Can you just explain that a little bit more? Can I ask you, are you including Transdev's admin costs and profit on that? And could you tell us how many staff are working, RMTU staff or trained staff are working in Wellington, and how many are working in Auckland, to give us a handle on why there is such a major difference? That is significant.
Yeah, I think all those points are dealt with in the report, but I'm happy to elaborate on them. The first one, the difference between the 125,669 and the 139, if you look at page 16, you'll see that 139 is the number I started with, and the difference is 13.6 of financing costs, which were of a capital nature in Auckland, not in Wellington. So the 125,669 versus 85,090 is net of those capital costs, so comparing like with like. But that number itself has been dealt with on page 16 as one of the adjustments. And the difference between the mayoral numbers and the numbers...
So you say the maintenance costs are not included in Wellington's operational costs?
No, it's not a maintenance cost, it's an interest cost. So the interest cost of 13.6, because Wellington and Auckland funded its trains differently.
That's how it's accounted for, right?
Yes.
It's accounted for by Auckland Transport as their operational costs.
Yes.
And you are aware that half of that 13.6 earns a subsidy, income subsidy from NZTA of that interest cost.
Yeah, but the whole point of this exercise was to compare like with like.
Okay.
And if you're comparing interest costs and capital costs in Auckland numbers and not in Wellington numbers, you're not comparing OPEX with OPEX, you're comparing OPEX with CAPEX. There are a number of accounting differences, and part of what this exercise was to do was to unpick those. And because there was a limit to how much we could ask Wellington to do, we had to work with their numbers and get the Auckland numbers to match.
That would there be a recommendation from you that in future, that in terms of attributing operational costs, Auckland Transport should not include that in their OPEX costs and attribute it like Wellington does? Will that be
you can include whatever you like. It only becomes an issue if you try and compare it with something else.
Oh, it is an issue, isn't it?
Yeah, it's included in your operational costs. It doesn't. It's
operational, it's not operational. We need to be clear about that, don't we?
Well, it's kind of irrelevant.
Anyways, let's get on to the. It's not kind of irrelevant. Let's get on to the 20 million difference in labour that you brushed over. It's a lot of money. 20 million.
Yes, it is. Yeah, and that's because you provide this. This is the whole point of the exercise. The very first point is what drives those costs is actually your provision of services. There are two reasons why you might have a different labour cost. One is you've got different labour practices, so you'd have.
You're saying they're broadly similar.
No, I'm not saying they're broadly similar. What I'm saying is the reason there's a difference, which is the very first point, I think on page, the second bullet point on the third slide here, says the primary difference is because you provide more services. If you're going to provide services, you need someone to drive the train.
Rather than saying that the labour structure is similar, would you not agree that in Auckland, that in Wellington, which has more trained staff than Auckland, interestingly enough, that staff is employed selling tickets and checking tickets, whereas in Auckland they're not. Would you say that's fair?
I'm sorry, the point is that Wellington have staff that sell tickets?
Yeah.
Yes, they do, yes.
Yeah.
And check tickets, and they have a trained
That
manager.
is quite a significant difference in a way, isn't it?
Not really, you have people who sell tickets.
Wandering up and down, or anyway, leave that.
That was the point behind
You're
it.
saying broadly similar, but with all due respect,
Councillor
disagree.
Lee.
Where are we getting to with this?
I think, Councillor Lee, we've got the report.
Can I just ask a few more questions about revenue? Is that right? We'll leave costs,
Yes.
move on to revenue. A significant difference there, 13 or so million for the same amount of passengers. You put it down to a lot of people travelling between Ridabart and Newmarket. And in terms of the hop card, have you interviewed trained staff on this question at all?
No.
Okay. Are you aware that trained staff complain about widespread practice of people hopping off at, say, Newmarket or some other station, tagging off and then hopping back on? It's called fare overriding, and the advent of the hop card, because there's only a limited amount of gates, makes that possible. Do you not consider that it is possible that the official journey time or low fares in Auckland could be distorted by those sorts of practices?
No.
You don't think they could?
No, and I'm happy to explain why. I was aware of this, it was raised by a Transdev. Most of the revenue is actually driven by the commuter peak, and so to suggest that an entire train is going to empty onto the platform, everyone will tag off and get back on, would be the only way you would materially affect that. It may happen for one or two people.
Not the entire train, but a significant amount of it goes on.
The trains only stop for a relatively short time, and if you can get a significant number of people off, tagged, and then back on, I'd be very surprised.
Okay, well, I have to take your word for it as opposed to train staff, but
I'm not saying, sorry, I didn't say it doesn't happen, I'm sure it does. People's ingenuity in finding ways to avoid fares in the absence of any penalty is significant.
You've talked about fare evasion, but the memorandum sent to the council and agreed to, or accepted by the council, didn't talk about evasion at all. It was only based on tickets sold. So tickets sold is how you estimate patronage and how you estimate revenue. It's all based on that. How many people are evading is not, I haven't raised, and I'm not entirely sure what scale of evasion there is. I mean, I hear reports. Are you aware? You've talked about evasion, you talked about joyriding, but it's not significant. They've got no money and so on. That would be, I don't know what you think about shoplifters, but leaving that aside, do you know what the scale of evasion is?
It's around 4 to 6%.
How much?
Around 4 to 6%. Auckland Transport did a report on it, which I wrote for them about 3 years ago.
4.6%.
Or between 4 and 6.
Between 4 and 6. Okay. We'll leave that to one side. But in terms, are you aware that when the staff that are detailed to check tickets, station blockaders or inspectors, which I think is a major part of the revenue difference, you've got people on trains who don't check tickets and then you pay extra to come and check tickets. But are you aware that when fare evaders are intercepted, the number is added to the patronage?
Yes, because I understand they're made to pay a penalty
So
fare.
that would be, so do you not think there is a disparity there between revenue and patronage? In other words, that's like a sales manager announcing that sales are up because he's edited the shoplifting.
Councillor Lee, I don't know whether it's fair to have a debate with Mr.
No.
Kello at this
I'm
stage.
gonna ask one more question.
I have other councillors who would like to make
Sure, I'm just
comments
going to
on
ask one
those
more question,
questions.
Madam Chair. In terms of this revenue disparity, Are you aware of how many tickets are given out for very popular events like Auckland Nines, Bledisloe Cup, Cricket World Cup, Super 15 and so on? Are you aware that that's a significant amount of people travel on the trains for those events?
Yes, I did talk to Transdev and Auckland Transport about special events.
Okay. Are you aware the fares for all those tickets are accounted?
They're accounted for within the ticket price, I understand.
Sorry?
They're accounted for as part of the ticket price of the event, as I understand.
Yes, but how is that money accounted when it's received as revenue? Are you aware of that?
I don't know, we didn't look into it because we
okay.
looked at
I'll finish
the number of people
Good,
travelling and it was relatively
Thank you.
small.
I think that's the main answer.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thanks for the report, Paul. It's very informative. More stops, more frequency, more expense. My question is about the fare and the fare changes. So you're basing your figures on a standard end of 2014. So the new fare structure that's coming in, is that going to, in your opinion, directly alter some of the differences?
I didn't actually cover that in the terms of reference, unfortunately, Councillor.
Outside your
It was outside of what I was asked to look at.
Okay. Because there are some considerable savings at the extremities of the services and slightly increased costs as you come in, so it may potentially change it. Auckland Transport may be able to inform us a bit more about that. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Fletcher.
Oh, thank you, Madam Chair. I really welcome this piece of work. I think it's going to give, I'm disappointed Councillor Wood's not here today because I think it's going to actually give some comfort, given the level of investment that Auckland is making into rail. I think it's important that we have such a report, and I would like to congratulate Councillor Lee for giving some impetus to actually commissioning such a piece to give councillors that level of comfort. So we're indebted to him on that. I'd like to suggest, Madam Chair, that when come time for the recommendations, that this be referred to the Board of Auckland Transport, this report. And really just some of the work here and recommendations I think will be really important for the consideration by the Board of Auckland Transport. I've been concerned for a very long time that the issue of fare evasion is one that we need. I know we've done a lot of work on it, but we need to continue to do a very big deep dive into it. And it's not just for us, it's for central government as well. I happened to be in Europe a few years ago when a young man was identified as a fare evader, and he got a €500 fine on the spot. It was instant. There was absolutely no getting out of it. He was nabbed, and he was held until such time as that fine was paid. So I'm not suggesting that we go down the path of being too punitive, but the government has to come to the party with us on providing legislation to provide better for enforcement. But I think the other thing that it does identify, and again it's something that Councillor Lee has been advocating for a very long time, the importance of gates. You know, if we haven't got those gates, it is going to be very, very hard, and that is an investment that we do need to make. So, Madam Chair, I'm happy to move these recommendations if you're happy to add a C.
We have added a C.
Thank you very much.
When it comes up. Thank you, Councillor Fletcher. And so it's been moved by Councillor Fletcher, seconded by...
Yes, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Member Taipari, and you're the next speaker.
Oh, well, that's actually what I was going to do, Madam Chair, after the
okay.
riveting questions earlier. Thank you.
Right, thank you. Councillor Wayne Walker.
Sure. Just a couple of questions. First of all, just picking up on the question that Councillor Lee asked about the issue around revenue from concerts and the like. It would be useful to have an answer around that, because I would imagine it's a matter of some magnitude. The other issue that I'd like to have addressed is you've clearly identified that there are opportunities for some significant gains, and they also could be of a high magnitude. It would be useful to know what amounts we could be looking at there, so that as councillors we've got that information, because obviously that goes to our budget, and I don't know how much those gains have been indicated to us and factored in. So, just coming to the recommendations, Madam Chair, as much and all as we are obviously going to receive this report, on my part, there are certainly some matters that I'd like to have some feedback on, and there may be other matters that councillors have raised. I don't know that Councillor Lee has really had everything he's concerned about answered. Are we in a position to have some further investigation or indication? It doesn't have to be particularly extensive, but it would be useful because we've got some great baseline information here.
And I think you could bring that up with Auckland Transport at the CCO committee. Councillor Walker, that would be the place.
I'm not on the CCO committee. This is a
Well, any
report.
councillor can
This
vote
is a
there.
report to this meeting. It goes to finance and performance. All the matters I've raised, particularly those that go to finance, I would suggest are very significant. They're of a high order of
Councillor
magnitude.
Walker, this is an independent review of the operating costs of comparison between Auckland and Wellington. There are some recommendations that we can take on board, and we will pass the report as asked by Councillor Fletcher to the board and management of Auckland Transport. Unfortunately, we've got a problem with the button, so I can't get the recommendations
So
up
just-
as in C.
Just with respect to that then, what will be the mechanism for our getting information back from Auckland Transport around some of the matters that are being raised here?
We can ask Auckland Transport to report back. Thank you. Mr Mayor.
Well, actually, I just want a brief comment, Madam Chair, rather than question.
That's okay.
Good. Okay, so in terms of the recommendations, thanks very much. It's a good comprehensive report, and very much appreciated to cover off a range of the issues that were raised, particularly towards the back end of the long-term plan. So very, very helpful. I think what you have done is reiterated or already affirmed what we know as a problem. First of all, with fare evasion, and secondly, the way in which, we deal with that issue of fare evasion. It's a matter that I raised with the board and the chair about a year ago, and it looks like we're actually heading down that direction, which is using the train managers as checkers for those who have paid or not paid. Until such time as the system is fully gated, quite frankly, it's the only way you can do it. So I'm pleased that you've acknowledged that, and I am really now looking forward to the Transport CCO really delivering around that and making the change necessary to give those guys the powers to actually do the checking. And then secondly, we have been talking about significant powers from parliamentary change for about 2.5, 3 years.
Longer than that, Mr Mayor.
Yeah, well, as long as I can recall. Anyhow, way too long. And my understanding always was that it was pretty much a regulatory issue. We should have had this sorted a long time ago. So there are 2 points here that are really affirmed by your report, and that in itself is well worth the cost of it. So well done. And now we look to the board to actually deliver on some of these outcomes.
It's all board policy anyway, by
Thank you.
coincidence.
Councillor Frum.
Thank you. This question may
Don't
be
mind
out of the
think alike.
scope, but does relate to what's in the report here. So cost effectiveness measures pegged towards the full first year of EMUs coming along, so 2016. Obviously, there's going to be less fuel costs, less maintenance with completion of the EMU. How much of that, how much of the factor for that cost effectiveness will be staff time? So, looking at your report, staff time is the reason currently for the large cost differential, but staffing practices not so much. And then reading the report where previously we're running 2 types of diesels, 2 pools of staff, and then extra training for those who were training for EMUs. Staffing costs as part of that cost efficiency, is that a major
You won't be saving a lot. There's two answers to that question. One is you won't save a lot with the staffing practices that you have now in staff time. The big savings are in maintenance, which drops to about a third of what it is at the moment, and in fuel, obviously, because electricity is a hell of a lot cheaper than diesel. The potential saving in costs is what you do with your train managers. And as I see it from the conversation I've had, there seems to be a choice between either getting rid of them, which I think was part of the original business case for the EMUs, and have a one-man operation or one driver operation, or get them to do something in addition to what they do at the moment around revenue enforcement. So continue to carry that cost and use them to reduce revenue leakage, which is a problem. And I hope I haven't underplayed that in the report. What I'm saying is you've got a problem with fare evasion, but if you deal with it, there's a cost to it, and don't expect to get a lot of money back, because you're just going to basically get these people off the trains.
Okay. Councillor Watson?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, you'll have picked up that one of the recurring concerns with the councillors anyway it relates to sort of fare evasion, fare overriding, and behaviour. But that wasn't part of your brief, though. Conceivably, poor behaviour discourages people from using the train. I just wanted to ask you about your question on the patronage and in terms how the evaders are included, and one of the reasons for that was because they're made to pay a penalty fee. Did we have any information on what revenue came in as a consequence of people being made to pay penalty fees?
We didn't split that out, but my understanding was, and this was from a previous piece of work, was that if someone's caught evading, they march them down to the machine and make them buy a ticket, and you pay the maximum fare for a trip on that line. So they're included in the I don't know if they're including passengers or not. Council Leave advised me they are. So they're including passengers and revenue. So to that extent, it wouldn't have a big impact on your average fares. Yeah. Which is why I made the comment that fare evasion is not the primary cause of your revenue shortfall.
No, okay. And in terms of comparison with Wellington, you talked to the operators in Wellington. Did they make any comments with respect of evasion, overriding, and penalty fees in terms of their revenue or lost revenue?
We didn't talk about lost revenue, but evasion is much harder on the Wellington line, even though it hasn't been on the Wellington lines, even though they haven't got gates. When I travelled there, I got checked every time. But to illustrate the point, there is a cost to revenue collection. At busy times, they have to have a ticket collector for every 2 carriages. So at times, they will have 4 or 5 people on a train checking tickets. So there is a cost to it, but if you don't do that, people will start to evade.
Yeah. The labour costs are quite significantly lower than Auckland's, even though with that greater number of people required for that part of the operation.
I'm sorry, can you ask the question again?
I think in the figures, their labour cost was significantly lower.
Yes, it is, yeah, but that's nothing to do with evasion or staffing. But the comment was that the staffing practices are largely the same. You've got a manager and a driver on each train. In Auckland, you have 40 or 50 roving ticket collectors. In Wellington, you have ticket collectors on the train. It's just they're doing the same job. It's just where you put them. Unfortunately, I didn't have access to what the total people complement in different roles was for Wellington, and given they weren't a participant in the study,
405.
There was a limit to what we could actually ask.
So you don't make any judgment as to what's the most effective practice then in terms of...
They have a different system, and it's clearly more effective at catching or at getting tickets checked. But there's a cost to it. I wasn't able to isolate out what that cost was, other than saying there's a different place. But you have a cost. You're incurring a cost up here through roving ticket inspectors as well. So it's just a different way of trying. So you've got roving ticketers and inspectors and gates. They've got no gates, and they've got dedicated ticket clippies on the trains.
Oh, you got no gates.
Thank you, Madam Chair. It'd just be useful to know. And I think people would be interested to know what recovery we get in terms of penalty payments. That would be interesting, certainly in terms of any further work or approach to the government then, wouldn't it? If we're getting virtually nothing back in penalty payments, well, obviously it's an unsatisfactory situation.
That's exactly right.
Yep. Thank you. Yes. Councillor Quacks.
Thank you, thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for your report. In terms of fare evasion, you don't actually identify the extent, do you, anywhere? I'm just trying to find that, the extent of fare evasion, and is that because once you've scared the fare evaders off the trains, you're not going to recover any fare from them anyway?
Yeah, to be honest, fare evasion wasn't part of the terms of reference. What was part of the terms of reference was why there was a difference in fare recovery and what the reason for the difference in fare recovery was. And the reasons for the difference in fare recovery is the fares are lower because the structure of it results in a different outcome. But fare evasion was one of the points that came out that I was asked to, it's part of the terms of reference, to sort of share good practice. And it's probably the most obvious difference in practice between the two cities. The terms of reference didn't extend to what the outcome of that was. I'm aware that there's a 4 to 6% level of fare evasion on the Auckland network because of a previous piece of work that I did looking specifically at fare evasion, which Auckland Transport has.
Yeah, Madam Chair, I just recall a conversation that Councillor Wood and I had with the county's Manukau Police, and they wouldn't allow their staff to travel on the train because of the danger that it posed to staff, because of the high level of people that were evading fare. And when I suggested to them that it was about 7%, they sort of looked at me incredulously and said, no, Councillor, it's much higher. We estimate the fare evasion to be somewhere in the region of 70%. Nothing that you came across would suggest that high level.
I was intrigued at this idea of fare evasion. I went and stood at Britomart and I watched people coming through the gates, and given that 65% of your trips terminate at a gated station, I stood there for half an hour and I watched people come through. Every single one of them came through.
But that's gated, everyone knows that.
I know, and that's where most of the journeys go. That's the point. This was the whole point. Your fare evasion measures here are gating at your busiest stations and roving ticket evaders. Now, on certain services outside the peak hours, out in the far ends of the line, this is where I was having my chats with fare evaders who were doing nothing better than cruising around the network. And there may well be, I'd be surprised if it was 70%.
And
but there'd be a lot.
vandalising at the same time.
I didn't catch them doing that, but I mean, it's interesting. It's a problem that seems to be prevalent in Auckland, but not in Wellington.
But 6% is not a problem.
Thank you.
That was yeah. So, but I guess
is that a real figure?
So to answer your question, Councillor, I think I didn't specifically look at fare evasion. The overall fare evasion levels look to be around about what you'd expect for this kind of network. But given the nature of the network, the nature of the city, and the environment that basically some of these people live in, they cruise around on the trains with nothing better to do. That came as a surprise to me, and it wouldn't surprise me if there are quite high levels of evasion. But that said, you've got roving ticket inspectors out there, and I felt very sorry for them. I stood on the station, and there were these 6 or 7 people who clearly had absolutely no intention of paying a fare, and there were 2 ticket inspectors with fluoro vests on, talking to them, asking where they're going, telling them they need to buy a ticket, etc., etc., etc. They waited till they got on the next train, and so I waited. The ticket inspectors left, and these people all got on the next train. There's absolutely nothing they can do. They haven't got the tools to do their job properly.
So would it be your contention that once you eliminated through various means ticket evaders from the network, the actual impact on revenue wouldn't be that high?
I don't think it will. I genuinely don't, because a lot of these people, they'll find something else to do with their day. They won't cruise around on the trains. But I do think you need to do it, because it's one of these things that if you just leave it, then honest people will start dodging fares.
Thank you. Councillor Filipina.
Thank you, Chair. Paul, thank you for the report, and you've been acknowledged by several councillors around here. Just a comment through you, Chair, just around your key conclusions. I welcome the first 2. That sort of outlines to me around your key conclusions the difference between Auckland and Wellington. But I also, your bottom point on your key conclusions and around the 2016 and the comments you made around improved significantly in 2016. So my question is back to you, Chair, around the process from now I see that refer the report to the Board of Auckland Transport for information. Will Paul's recommendations that he's included in his report, I'm assuming that the Auckland, or the Board of the Auckland Transport will be looking at the whole report, and will they be coming back to Finance and Performance Committee in regards to, I think what's important, the 2016 and the significant savings. I'm hoping that whenever that report comes back, and if it's your one, Chair, I welcome that, but hopefully with the Board of Auckland Transport, they include the savings for that full year with the EMUs.
Yes, thank you.
But again, thank you.
It will be either this committee or
Cool.
the CCO review committee.
Okay, thank you.
Looking at the Chief Financial Officer from Auckland Transport, and he's nodding his head very rapidly.
Yeah, cool.
Thank you.
That'll be good. Thank you.
Thanks. Councillor Casey.
Paul, just to return to a question that Councillor Lee asked you about his memo that prompted this investigation, you didn't take that into account? You didn't look at Councillor Lee's gigures at all?
So I did get I looked at both sets of Councillor Lee's figures, and I was provided with the information that Auckland Transport sent to the Mayor's office in response to that. The difference was basically, as best I recall, the difference that I have on page
16 of your one.
Yep. On page 16, I think the numbers in the board memo were 143.6, and the numbers that went to the Mayor's office were 139.3. The difference being that there was a double count of security costs that was included in the 139.3 that was added on in error. Would that be correct?
Why are you working on that earlier one when that wasn't the authorised memorandum? That seems kind of odd. You're setting up a straw man.
Councillor Lee. Councillor Lee.
Well, he's asking me a question. He's asking me a question, Madam Chair. Am I free to answer it or not?
Councillor Lee.
You know, you're not working off the memo that the council authorised.
Order. Can you...
Seems a bit strange to me.
Can you... I actually made the point at the beginning of the meeting that this report came from your memo requesting
No, but it's not in his report. He keeps going back to an earlier one, which...
Councillor Lee. Deep breath. Thank you.
It's about a $60 million difference rather than a $65 million difference.
Thank you. I think we have to learn to be polite to visitors in this chamber. Thank you.
Just looking for the fire alarm button again.
Sorry?
I was just looking for the fire alarm button again.
That's the problem. Look, it's been moved and seconded. I'd like to thank you very much. As you've heard round the table, it's a very clear report. It certainly gives us a basis, as Councillor Fletcher so rightly said, and it is a shame that Councillor Wood is away, but he is riding trains overseas as we speak, from what I can gather. So I'm sure he'll have some good reports to have when he gets back. So
Hope he's paying his
thank
fare.
you very, very, very much. Thank you. I'll move recommendations. All those in favour?
Aye.
Against? Carried. Thank you very much.
Well, this is one comment in closing. I first came up travelling the trains up here 15 years ago, and Auckland was faced with a train service that looked about it needed to be closed down, had 2 million people, and nobody used it. The stations were knackered and the trains were ancient. And as a city, I think Auckland's made a tremendous investment into something that now looks like a modern public transport system. And but that comes at a cost.
Great. Thank you.
You ring talk back and tell them that?
Thank you.
Thanks for
Thank you, because I know Wellington doesn't necessarily look like that at all. Right, moving on, councillors, to item number 9. And I welcome Alistair and Wayne and members of the Amenities Board that I see in the audience.
Morning, Madam Chair, councillors. The report before you presents staff recommendations on the review that we've undertaken of the ERAFA funding model.
That's right.
Just as a bit of a refresher, thinking back to the terms of reference of this review, the terms of reference were premised on the fact that Council would continue to fund a group of regional amenities, and the review was really focused on looking at the best way to fund those organisations and to keep them financially viable. We were not looking at the review at who should be one of those amenities, so that wasn't one of the issues that we were looking at. So the overarching objective of the review was to look at the best way to achieve long-term sustainable, affordable and predictable funding for the amenities, while recognising Auckland Council's purpose and its other responsibilities under its statutory framework. So just very quickly, I've already mentioned the terms of reference. We got them signed off back in February. We went away and we identified some issues with the current funding arrangement under the AREFA Act. We developed some criteria for evaluating any solutions to those issues that we identified. We came up with 7 different options for funding models, including what we currently have, the status quo, and the report before you looks at the evaluation of all those different options using the criteria that were previously agreed by this committee. Just as a very quick refresher, up there on the big screen are the 7 different options that we considered, number 1 being the status quo. The next 3 options were, if you like, amendments within the current legislative framework. Options 5 and 6 would require amendment to the current legislation, and option 7 was complete repeal of the current Act. I'd just like to point out that when we were undertaking our evaluation of the different options, we got extensive feedback from representatives of the regional amenities. We also engaged with the funding board. We went to the local boards and asked them for their feedback on any potential impacts at a local level on the different funding models that we were evaluating. Those were the big ones, but we also went and talked to people like Foundation North and other sort of interested parties in the funding sector. I'll just put up on the big screen, I don't expect you to look at this in any detail, but when we undertook our evaluation of the different options, we basically used the current funding model as the baseline, and then we looked at each of the different options using the different criteria that were agreed to see would the proposed option be better or worse than what we currently have. Just to give you an idea, green is good, red is bad, and sort of yellowy orange is fairly neutral. So just that slide is just to indicate that our preferred option was option number 3 up there, the sustainable funding option. The current Act is all about delivering financial sustainability for the regional amenities. But as we got further and further into the review, there were 3, I guess, persistent issues that kept coming up time and again. First of those was that the current Act specifically prevents the provision of capital funding to the regional amenities. However, some of the regional amenities have quite extensive capital funding requirements, so that has caused issues in the past, and one of the things we look to address. Perhaps even more significantly, the Act requires the funding board to provide adequate, sustainable and secure funding to the amenities. Now, what is adequate funding for each amenity is determined through an annual funding process, which largely focuses on the needs of the amenities in the following financial year. It doesn't prevent consideration of longer term plans, but it certainly limits, I think, the consideration of where the amenities are wanting to go and what financial sustainability looks like for them in the medium term. And I think the third issue that came up, particularly from a council perspective, is that whilst Auckland Council is compelled to provide funding to the amenities, the opportunity for Auckland Council to ensure funding is directed towards, Council's highest priority strategic outcomes and goals is relatively weak within the regime. So the option that we're recommending that we pursue looks to develop the concept of sustainable funding for each of the amenities. That would require the funding board to establish a framework to define what financial sustainability is for each of the amenities, and for the amenities to develop medium-term plans that would assist in the decision-making. It would also start looking more at issues around what's an appropriate level of reserves for each of the amenities to hold. You know, are we looking for them to break even? Is it okay for an amenity to maintain a level of reserves in their bank accounts, looking at their future needs, possibly even capital projects? And we also think the option provides better support or better supports a strategic alignment of what the amenities are doing and what Auckland Council sees as the needs within the region in terms of the Auckland Plan. So what we're recommending is, as a path forward here, is that the funding board would lead a process, put in place effectively a framework which would define what financial sustainability looks like for each of the amenities. Now that process will require a bit of time, resource and energy, and possibly a bit more money from both the funding board, council and the amenities. We haven't been able to quantify that yet, but I think we'll come back to you with a report in the future around that. And then we'd look for each amenity to develop a medium-term plan. We're suggesting sort of a 3 to 5 year term. And these plans would cover off things like the level of reserves they need to maintain, to keep themselves viable, what sort of surpluses they would be looking to generate in order to fund future projects, whether they be capital or operational, what levels of service each of the amenities is planning in the immediate future, how are they intending to deal with the growth in population in Auckland, and are they looking to increase their levels of service, not just to cater with growth, but actually improve their levels of service. And we see all those being discussions which more actively involve the council group, as well as the funding board in each of the amenities. Once those plans have been developed by the amenities, we'd see those plans being then used to inform the annual funding process. So when annual funding decisions are being made, there's a bit more of a medium-term sort of context in which to make those. And Auckland Council has the ability within the current Act to add a funding principle which could require the funding board to take into account the medium-term plans of the amenities when making its annual funding decisions and allocations. So that basically summarises our proposed way forward. I think just a couple of observations coming out of the review that some of you who were here in the first term may recall that a couple of additional funding principles were added at that time, requiring the funding board to have regard to council's proposed rates increases and also asking the amenities to align their activities as much as possible to the Auckland Plan. We see this, the outcome of this review as sort of being a continuation of the thinking that was sort of around at that time. And I think it reflects a maturing of the regime. The Act isn't that old, I guess. It's about 8 years old. I think it's fair to say that when the Act first came into being, a number of the amenities were, if not on death's door, certainly needed a fairly rapid cash injection to keep them sustainable. I think all of the amenities have developed to a point where they can now start planning with more certainty for the future. So in some ways our recommendations are just a reflection of the evolution of both the amenities and the current funding model. I think it's also worth noting that there are other sort of drivers within the sectors which these amenities operate within, and while we're not proposing significant changes to the legislation at this time, drivers for future change may in fact come from the different sectors where they currently operate, and that's perhaps something we just need to keep an eye on into the future. And perhaps as a final point, that legislative change would be a significant effort in time and resource, and would need to demonstrate a very clear benefit in going down that route. And I think our way forward, I think there's some significant improvements we can make within the current legislative framework, so I don't think at this stage would be in any way supporting legislative change, because I think there's significant improvements to be had within what we already have. So I think that would end my introduction. Happy to take any questions. I would also note that we have David Holdsworth, who's been one of the representatives from the amenities that we've been working with. He can answer questions, and we also have some members of the funding board in the audience if any questions need to be asked of them.
Well, thank you very much, Alistair. I know you've done an extremely good amount of work on this, and David, to your team, and I know there's been a working party of the amenities working on this as well, and Wayne, so I know that it probably was a piece of work that you didn't actually need on your plate at the time you got it, but you've done a really good job, so thank you very much for that. Councillor Casey.
Alistair, have you heard from the 5 other boards? There's only 16 give their views in the report. There's 2 of them, one's Albert Eden, the other's Puketapa.
As of today, we have not, no, but we've had a report on each of their agendas. Some of the local boards felt that they were unable to give comment, so I think they simply felt they did not know enough about it, make an informed decision or informed comment. Maybe I'll hand over to Wayne.
So just after the authoring of the report, we received 2 resolutions or advice of action from 2 local boards. There was just those 2 that were there. I think one was Puketapa, and the other was Papakura.
Did either of them express a preference for options?
Across the local boards, perhaps not surprisingly, we had a variety of views.
Right,
there was no strong consensus amongst...
No, I understand that, but did either of those 2 boards have a preference for an option?
Puketapa referred to various components that had been addressed through the options, expressing a preference. It was in favour of continuation of the funding board, appointment of independent members to the funding board, that operational funding be determined by the funding board on a rolling basis, which would require change of legislation. Consideration of capital is a particular feature of what they were recommending, as well as clarification of the term sustainable. They were also in favour of public notification of funding allocations and a greater emphasis on the fairness of the way the system works.
And the other one?
Papakura dismissed options 5, 6 and 7, also dismissed option 4 and indicated that options 2 and 3 should be more closely considered.
My second question relates to option 7 and my failure to understand why we wouldn't save money. You say in the report, depending on what administration is set up in the future, it would seem obvious to me that if the funding board is no longer there, then there's a huge saving.
I think what we felt was you've got to look at the administrative efficiency as well, that yes, the funding board would not be there, but council staff would have to undertake the work that they do, and the work that they do is actually quite significant. I probably shouldn't say this within the room, but I think we actually get quite a good bang for our buck out of the funding board. But by far and away the biggest cost of the funding regime is the grants is provided to the actual amenities rather than the administration costs. And I guess what we're saying is that if your goal is to provide financial sustainability to the amenities, now that would be largely neutral across the options. How much they require to keep them financially sustainable is in many ways, it is what it is, and how we fund that is not irrelevant, but you've got to consider that if council's policy setting is to maintain them financially, then we're not going to make a great deal of saving by us administering and deciding how much they require to do that, as opposed to an independent funding board making that assessment. It's the amount that we pay to each of the amenities could well end up the same, depending on what council's policy framework is for that. And from an administrative point of view, the cost incurred in administering it could well be about the same as having the funding board. There is a lot of assumptions in that because we don't know what council's policy framework would be for funding the amenities. We may decide that no, we'd look to reduce how much we provide them all. On what basis are we going to do that? Where does that leave the amenities? Would they no longer be financially sustainable? What would be the impact of that? So, but on the assumption that we'd look to keep them at the same level of financial viability, then we do not think there'll be a great deal of savings in going to option 7.
Thank you. Councillor Crum.
Understanding that the Act requires the funding board to provide adequate funding to the amenities, amongst other things, and acknowledging the constraints that the annual application process represents. Under the preferred option, there's a call for coming up with medium-term plans for the amenities. That's not something that we could have visibility over already and extrapolate. Why is that? That seems to be quite a big underpinning of the preferred option.
Yeah, the Act at the moment, there is an option within it for the amenities to prepare, I think, a 10-year plan, which can go to the funding board, but it's in no way compulsory. And I guess what we're saying is that the Act does require the funding board to provide the amenities with adequate funding, but it does rather beg the question, adequate for what? And to deliver what level of service, what are we actually expecting these to do? And the basis of our recommendation is that in the development of these medium-term plans, we get greater visibility of what it is actually the amenities are wanting to achieve, and are able to engage in a more informed dialogue about, well, what Auckland Council actually sees as being an appropriate level of ratepayer contribution to those services.
Getting them to think a bit longer term than they have been, rather than year by year, so it's probably a start. Any other questions or comments? Okay, I'll move the recommendation. Have I got a seconder?
Yep.
Yes, thank you, Mr Mayor. All those in favour?
Aye.
Against? Carried. Thank you very much, guys.
Thank you.
Great. Moving on, item 10. I see Anthony. But not Robin. Right.
Thank you.
Over to you. Thank you.
All right, good morning. Through the chair of
Probably
the committee
need to introduce yourselves to the councillors, because they
apologies.
probably don't know. I mean, some of us know you.
Anthony Akers with the Growth and Infrastructure Unit, here with David Hawkey.
Yeah, I'm David Hawkey. I'm the Manager of Infrastructure and Transport Strategy.
My colleague Robert Lundberg, who would have been here this morning, is ill unfortunately, so he sends his apologies. Through the chair, if the committee is happy to take the report as read, we can just jump to some of the key points.
Yep. Yes, that'd be great.
I'm happy
Thank
to
you.
move
And
it,
thank
Madam
you for
Chair.
sending out that email the other
thank you.
day too.
Apologies for the
Moved and seconded.
late notice on that,
Okay,
on that email.
that's okay. Do you want to just make some key points?
All right, so just to give a little bit of context, the digital enablement plan is off the back of the registration of interest for expanded funding under central government's ultra-fast broadband, rural broadband 2 funds and the mobile black spot fund. Through that process, we got responses from 299 individuals and groups throughout rural Auckland. Those were groups in 92 communities and then further grouped into 52 candidate areas. Under UFB2, there were 11 coverage gaps within the metropolitan urban limit around the UFB1 existing coverage, 17 additional rural communities, and then under RBI2, another 24 rural communities, and then within the Mobile Black Spot Fund, an additional 29 mobile black spots across rural Auckland. Off the back of that process, central government released a long list of potential communities under the Ultra-Fast Broadband 2 program on the 1st of September. It reflects primarily the decision-making process based on population density of those rural communities with the additional work that we've put in with the registration of interest. So just quickly, that list includes, at this stage, Warkworth, Snells Beach, Helensville Parakai, Paro, Wellsford, Waiau Beach, Muriwai, Waimoku, and some of those fringe areas around the Auckland zone, also around Pukekohe and around the existing UFB planned coverage on Waiheke Island. Yeah. And then following on from that, there is a request for supplier proposals that will close on the 28th of October, taking all of that information into account. The long list does cover 7.5% of New Zealand's additional rural population, which is greater than the initial 5 additional percent that they are seeking to cover. So by no means is this a final list. And at this stage, we're trying to get access to the geospatial information to see how well those areas match up to what we provided through to central government. If successful, those areas will be covered by 2022, and that follows the completion of the existing UFB1 network. So jumping into the digital enablement plan, so this is really all about what councils can do to minimise the demand risks for suppliers installing broadband into communities. Central government asked us to focus on delivering activities that feature leadership, community enablement and business development. Under those, we've additionally grouped the activities for Auckland Council under access, so expanding access for broadband through things like Wi-Fi services and libraries, skills, helping Aucklanders develop the skills they need to take advantage of access to broadband and technology, and then also awareness, so helping Aucklanders understand what the value proposition is. And we also chose to focus on existing activities across council. So this, to be clear, does not commit any future additional funding at this stage to digital enablement activities, because there is actually a lot of really good work going on across Auckland Council's family organisations that already highlight some of the great work we're doing in this area, which is included in the digital enablement plan. So that includes ATED, libraries, Auckland Transport, resource consents and some other internal divisions. The reason we went with a existing activity focus is to reduce risk for Auckland Council. It's not clear exactly how much of an impact this digital enablement plan will have on the coverage outcomes underneath those 3 funding programs. So it wasn't really worth committing to any new budget because we didn't know what the impact would be. And part of it is just to make all of that good activity visible to central government and to show that it's not a reactive thing. This is all proactive work that's already going on across the organisation. So just in terms of the processes there, so the original ROI was submitted on the 10th of July, with that long list submitted released on the 1st of September. Digital enablement plans are then due 12 p.m. tomorrow, the 18th of September. Suppliers will tender their bids by the 28th of October, and we're expecting from central government the UFB final decisions in the first half of 2016. Now, following on from that, the Rural Broadband Initiative and Mobile Black Spot funds will be announced as well, and we expect them to go through a similar process to the UFB2 funding. And then just a quick note, just to say that we won't be done following those coverage outcomes. We know that not all communities will get coverage under this funding. There simply isn't enough money being invested by central government. So we're really keen to work with rural Auckland to identify coverage gaps. And what we're doing at the moment is putting in some research around building a baseline for rural broadband in Auckland. So really looking at what the minimum speed and quality of service needs to be for rural Aucklanders to have the same opportunities as their urban counterparts, which is particularly important as services using these networks get more bandwidth intensive and require better and better infrastructure. So that's a piece of work that's just started, and there's some really good research coming out through that. We'll also be looking at things like assessing the impact of 4G wireless broadband and what impact that will have on the existing coverage outcomes that central government has put in place through the Rural Broadband 1 initiative. And so we'll be looking to fill any of those knowledge gaps, build relationships with both suppliers and communities, and then helping to broker relationships between suppliers and communities. Often we find suppliers don't know what they don't know, and council can play a really important role in bridging those two and essentially making quite visible what the issues are and where coverage needs to be. And then also reducing the risk for suppliers where possible. So some of the research I've seen so far already suggests that suppliers are more likely to develop broadband networks where they know that the communities will take those services up, and overseas, particularly in the States. We've seen that where councils have supported the adoption, that's made some really significant inroads in terms of I guess helping suppliers make those decisions about where they'll get their return on investment. And it might seem obvious to all of us, but those suppliers do need that level of certainty when they're making funding decisions. So that really covers off the main kind of overview of where we're going, and happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much. And I mean, you've done an awful lot of work, you and the three of you, Robert included, and I know you've been out to various communities, and I think we've got a huge database now of what our communities need and are looking for, and if we can facilitate and enable, that's really quite good.
Absolutely.
So, Councillor Cashmore.
Yes, thanks, Madam Chair, and I'd reconfirm your words about the work you've done here. Thanks very much. Thank you for the report, and thanks to Robert. Hope he gets well soon. And also thank you for the extra information that came out and arrived at my place yesterday afternoon by a relatively slow pigeon, but some of us in the rural areas are getting better serviced. So this is ongoing work. We have better ideas 2016 about what we are going to receive, because we've already identified a lot of those gaps. Last month in Kazakhstan, a satellite was launched. It's the first of 80, I believe. Don't quote me, but I believe it's 80. That's going to give worldwide full broadband coverage, I presume at a cost. Is there any work being done by the Crown to say when that's going to be enacted and enabled? Do we know?
Not that I'm aware of at this stage, but that's certainly something we can report back on.
Because that's certainly game-changing, isn't it, if that happens?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Member Taipari.
Oh, kia ora, Madam Chair. I was just reviewing the Māori impact statement and the plan itself. And in the Māori impact statement, there's been the reference to rural marae and communities, but it appears not to be reflected in the plan. And I was just questioning whether there was consideration of marae and Māori communities in the plan that might have strengthened the plan as an advocacy tool.
I will have to check on one of those action points. There is reference under the intention to expand services through community centres to include marae and papakainga
So you will do that?
That's something that we've indicated we'd like to explore. That will be part of the next steps that we undertake.
Okay.
But we haven't made an explicit commitment financially at this stage because that's one of our following steps.
Okay, so I was just saying that it's already been highlighted through the Māori impact statement, so work must have been done at least to get moving on that. Well, based on what you've just said then, what is the planning for future engagement with Māori?
So at this stage we've met with the Secretariat of the IMSB. We haven't, through this process, had enough of a lead time to actually do any significant Māori engagement, particularly because this is focusing on a lot of internal council activity that's going on. So following on from this process, we will be working very closely with IMSB and with Te Waka Angamua to work on an engagement strategy with Māori communities.
Develop an engagement strategy?
Absolutely, yes.
Okay, but then you've just said earlier that you've got more work to do and yet you don't even know how you're going to go about doing it.
That's something that we're taking advice on.
Okay.
I think we probably we could have an offline discussion, but certainly it may be at the point of putting an IMSB member on the working party.
Yeah.
Because,
Absolutely.
I mean, we have talked
think that would be
about
very valuable.
Marai, and we talked about Papakori.
Thank you. We'll note that recommendation.
Yes, don't disagree with that, Madam Chair, but of course important to the Independent Māori Statutory Board is the engagement directly with Māori in the communities that you make reference to.
Yep.
Absolutely, and we haven't undertaken or we haven't been able to undertake that much in the way of direct Māori engagement, but informal engagement, but we have had informal opportunities through work that we've done. I'm doing some work on Great Barrier Island, so we've been able to do some work through groups like Ngāti Rehua informally, but we are looking to formalise that engagement process.
And the last question, Madam Chair, is I may have missed it, but the timeframes for the MV funding decisions?
Timeframes for the funding decisions, so for ultrafast broadband 2, we're expecting those decisions to come through by mid-2016. Beyond that, they haven't given us any clear indication on when the rural broadband and mobile black spot funding announcements will be made, but we expect those to fall in line with the UFB decision.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Okay. Councillor Cooper.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just want to acknowledge the working party, Councillor Cashmore and myself and Councillor Webster, because we've been working alongside the staff for quite some time, and and I think that probably addresses some of your concerns, Member Taipari. It was basically a reactive pulling together of a committee on concerns from the community, particularly the Bethel's community. I mean, it's very sad to see they're not on that list that the government's put out, even though they're on the top of our list. So I hope they are listening, because they haven't listened to our list. But I think too that, and then this fortuitously came along that we had the opportunity to apply, and so it's been a bit of a race to get the applications done and put this together, but it's a good piece of work. And just to comment on the Māori engagement, there has been engagement with Te Kaurau Amaki, who have a proposed Māori development at Te Hinga Bethels, and so we have been talking to Te Kaurau about that, because we felt that was a very good, another reason why with a marae being developed up there, that was really important for their education and employment opportunities, tourism opportunities, to have robust broadband there, but not to be as yet. I guess the other thing around this is that we're always told to stick to our knitting, and I think this is actually our knitting. This is infrastructure, and digital infrastructure is becoming just as important, if not more important, than roads. And I've had more calls and communications about poor digital connectivity than I have about roads and footpaths in the last year. So it shows that this is becoming increasingly important to employment opportunities. Even students working from home in these communities, they can't do the work that they need to do. Even university students, everything's online now. There's some great businesses in our rural communities which can't operate effectively from home anymore. And so I think this is really crucial. So I'm really pleased that we're keeping going with this work. It is essential work. It is about employment, it is about connectivity, it is about everything that we stand for to have a great community. And the other thing that is really good, I think, for the rest of the country, note, we're one of the largest rural councils in the country. So we can't be fobbed off anymore and saying, oh, you're just a city. We've actually got a huge rural area, and it's been highlighted by the number of rural communities we have that aren't, that are still remain digitally remote. So I think that this work will hopefully push forward better connectivity for our community. Thank you, Madam Chair. And thank you to Anthony and Robbie, who've been doing fantastic work.
Thank you. Councillor Casey.
Just timely to note the fantastic work that the Auckland libraries have been doing in this sphere, and half of the community digital activities done in libraries. So it just occurred to me to maybe ask for a report to my committee on that particular aspect. So no, just great. It's great. That's all.
Again, just to add to that, some of that international experience as well does suggest that libraries are playing an even greater role now with rural broadband, because they often are what they call an anchor point, which usually has quite a good internet connection and then provides a lot of those services to customers that otherwise would not have access at all.
Just are all our libraries now on broadband? And if not, how many are not? And similarly, just if you've got that information for community centres as well.
I don't have that information to hand, but that's something that we can...
I'll ask for that to come to my committee. It's fascinating.
Thank you. Councillor Darby.
Thanks, gentlemen. Just in arriving at the digital enablement plan that we've got here, and it's well broken down, when you were drafting this up, it's well focused on places. I want to just be more comfortable in the fact that you gave some strong emphasis to youth, young people, in arriving at that plan. Can you just take us through how the youth market is going to be better satisfied with this enablement plan? And one of my first questions, you also give some attention to libraries. That's great. And you go on to talk about exploring better digital enablement in community centres, public hainga you just mentioned. But town centres, where are we up to in all our town centres and major employment zones being enabled digitally, and I mean ultra-fast digitally? And I just don't get a sense of that there. And where are we up to in enablement right across our transport network? That is, every train station, I think Auckland Transport are doing some work on this, but if you can just let us know, every train station, every bus station, every ferry terminal, and every bus, every rail carriage, every ferry.
Okay, I think I'll start with the point around town centres. I guess is a good place to start. So we do have the Auckland Wi-Fi network does run in some town centres. That was built primarily off the back of the last Rugby World Cup. My understanding, I don't take the lead on the Wi-Fi network, so I'm not 100% certain as to where the decision-making process is with that at the moment, but I understand that we are in a process of evaluating where we go to next with that, whether or not it serves good value for money for council, given the massive amount of competition there is in the Wi-Fi market, whether or not that need has been superseded by, or that demand has been superseded by other Wi-Fi networks, particularly looking at some of the telcos as they roll out additional Wi-Fi networks, and the way businesses are providing their own Wi-Fi networks now as well in cafes and that sort of thing. So in town centres, our focus has primarily been on working with the business community through the business improvement districts team. So that's delivering a lot of messaging around what the value proposition is with fast broadband, how it can transform people's businesses. And then one of the activities we have in there is also looking at the digital transformation tool that has been delivered through Dunedin's digital office. That is something that ATED's looking at the moment to help businesses actually work some of that technology and connectivity into their businesses. But I think in terms of that youth access, we have focused a lot on libraries. They do provide a massive service in terms of Wi-Fi connectivity and computer use to youth. This is by no means an exhaustive outline, so there is definitely other activity that will be happening across the council that will happen in the future. This is really an indication to central government on how we anticipate supporting access to digital.
So I would imagine young people use the public transport system hugely. I mean, they're major users. And look, are you aware of where Auckland Transport is up to in enablement on its whole network?
Unfortunately, at this stage, I'm not personally aware of where they are with that, but that's something that we can...
So would it have not been of value to know that? Because that's our network. That's our network, our public transport network owned by us, where a lot of people are travelling. We need to make that seductive. One of the ways to make that seductive is to enable it digitally.
Absolutely.
That would also be a focus on young people as well. So has that not been considered in this enablement plan?
Really the focus of central government, what they really run out of these digital enablement plans is to highlight how councils can support the uptake and use of the UFB network. That UFB network will support the transport Wi-Fi network.
Yes.
But it's about getting more people, more individuals, more groups connecting to UFB in businesses, in homes, and where they don't have access through other means like Wi-Fi. So I take your point that that's something that could be expressed to central government as well. I'm just unfortunately at this stage not entirely sure on where that Wi-Fi where the Wi-Fi network on Auckland Transport Services is at this stage.
Okay, well, just to follow that, because for me that's a bit of a disconnect. Now I understand we're talking about the hardwired ultra-fast network, but the Wi-Fi systems hook off that. So we're not talking about two different things here. We are still talking about the one thing.
Absolutely.
And I'm concerned that we're actually not thinking about the enablement on the public transport network. So is there scope, Madam Chair, to work this up and have some focus on that enablement right across the public transport network? I mean, this technology's there, it's available.
I think, Councillor, if you look at 3.1 implementation partners, one of those is
Page, sorry, Chair.
94, page 10. This is an ongoing piece of work. It's not
concluded.
It's not sort of finished. That's why the working party will continue, and that's all part of it. And I think as far as the youth is concerned, I mean, I think Councillor Cooper put it so well. One of the problems with our youth is that, and you know, you take, for example, people who go to Overy College, most of their homework is done on digital devices, and yet when they go home, they can't get it. So they can't do their homework. So they have to go to libraries, and libraries are closed in the evening. So, you know, some of this is, so certainly we're looking at all that. And as you quite rightly say, you know, I think I'm pretty sure that the northern buses now have digital on their buses, don't they, Chris?
With a hop card.
Yeah, with a hop card. Yeah.
Madam Chair, I think there's a lot of work being done by Auckland Transport, and that might constitute a briefing at the appropriate forum.
Yeah.
And I can give Councillor Darby the assurance that the Board of Auckland Transport have actually spent a lot of time on this issue. But we are trying to link it to the hop card, which I think is the appropriate mechanism for encouragement.
Yep. Yeah,
Just to go back to this, Madam Chair, it's to endorse the enablement plan. And I'm saying that one of the gaps in the enablement plan, just as there is to provide free Wi-Fi in public libraries, I'd like to see a work stream that is to provide free Wi-Fi on the public transport network. Now, I know Auckland Transport is doing some work, but I just think it's critical This is where you make public transport the Audi rather than the Skoda.
Yep.
Absolutely. And just in response to that, I'm happy to go back to Auckland Transport and work in one of these activity tables in with them around Wi-Fi before we
finalise it.
Plan.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. And Councillor Wayne Walker.
Sure. Just got a quick question. I understand what's going out in terms of the rollout. The interest I've got is around the speed. I understand there's a good delivery on download speed, but there are limitations on the upload speed, that there's a significant difference. That has a huge impact on some businesses, particularly if you're involved with film and digital and the like. You really want rapid upload speed, and I just wondered if it'd be possible to have some information about that.
Absolutely. So in terms of the UFB network, just in terms of the information I have access to at this stage, a lot of that comes down to, on the fibre network particularly, what plan a business or a customer signs up to. So in the residential side of things, you can get at a base level a 30 gigabyte per second down and 30 meg per second download and 10 upload. But as you scale those plans up, the upload capabilities of for businesses does increase to a certain degree. It's not symmetrical at this stage. We still have an asymmetrical broadband quality in New Zealand that definitely needs some attention, but it's something that we expect will scale up over time.
Yeah, I mean, my understanding is the technology that's being put in place now is locking us into this asymmetrical problem. And there's some investment required around that. It would be useful to understand that and know about that. I'd certainly be interested because it's going to be a real concern.
Absolutely.
Download's fine, but if you can't upload at the same speed, you've got major problems.
I think as part of our process moving forward and setting that baseline, we're hoping to have quite a comprehensive assessment of what technology is available across the Auckland region, and that will include things like the capabilities of the UFB fibre network and things like 4G as well, as they apply in practice rather than the theory.
Yeah, I guess my concern is we're already years behind some other countries in terms of broadband and speeds. If we're locking ourselves into a delivery, certainly on upload, that's slow, that we're even further behind.
Okay, thank you. If there's no more questions or comments, I'll move the recommendations. All those in favour? Aye. Against? Carried. Thank you very much. Thanks, guys, very much for what you're doing. Excellent work. Right, councillors. Approval and recommendation of the annual report, which I'm sure everyone has read from cover to cover. Actually, it's quite interesting. It's quite good. It's even positive, Kevin. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Have a small presentation just to run through, and then we can take some questions at the end of that if there are some. Just as a little reminder, this is the annual report for the entire group. It covers that financial year 1 July 14 to 30th of June 2015. And ultimately, this is our reporting back mechanism to our communities to talk about how we've actually performed against those expectations that were set through that public consultative process of an annual plan, be it during an annual LTP or on its own. The other thing worth mentioning here, though, is also that the individual performance of the entities making up the group obviously have come through various committees in the past. So the CCOs have all reported through on a quarterly basis, including June, and the parent has also reported through on this performance. So this document is really just putting all of that together into a statutory format and issuing that for the public. There are 3 steps as far as governance structure to this process. We have been to the Audit and Risk Committee, that was on Tuesday. And that was really a review of the process and any of the audit findings. And so the Audit and Risk Committee did support adoption of this document. So what we're really seeking today is for this committee to support the document as far as an indication of the performance of the entity, being the entire group, and then ultimately looking at next Thursday recommendation going from those two, this committee and the Audit and Risk Committee, to the governing body for formal adoption of the document. Look, the year, it's worth starting with the point of all about growth, and the growth of the drivers of most of the influence that impacted on the annual report itself. So population, it has grown by $132,000 over the last 5 years, a substantial portion. People, sorry. People are just dollars, yes. And look, so obviously to support that level of growth, what it does need is significant investment in infrastructure, but also increasing demands for services. And we'll see that in a couple of slides, just around the sheer quantity of consenting that's arisen and other factors. And also, it's worth mentioning there were significant one-off initiatives that occurred during that 14-15 financial year. Indications of the growth, well, public transport patronage, up 10%, so a total of 79 million trips. That's 5 million more than we were forecasting for the year. Rail patronage alone within that has grown by 22%, significant increases there. As far as the indicators of development goes, we've got resource consent applications up 5.5%, building consent 6%, and then the underlying inspections of buildings up 5%. All substantial growth figures. Other factors, it was the first full year of the hop card operation, and 67% of all of the public passenger trips are now utilising that hop card. And obviously, as I mentioned earlier on, one-off events, there's two significant ones there, the 2015 ICC Cricket World Cup, as well as the FIFA Under-20s World Cup. And then in addition, there's also preparation for the 2017 Masters Games. So some significant work going into large events to occur in the Auckland area. On the financial highlights, as all the growth has driven that city investment, the consenting, the growth and the services, that's led to both expenditure and income both being up compared to budget. Netting those off to look at what the operational performance looked like, the operational surplus before gains and losses was $80 million surplus. So a positive result. We were anticipating a bit of a deficit, so that's been turned around for the financial year. Within that inherently were the efficiency targets, which are building up each year since we came into existence, and that was now $183 million per annum for the 14-15 year, so that has now been achieved. As we have mentioned in previous years, there are always accounting adjustments that also reflect, beyond the underlying operational performance. And in the end, it was 800 million or close to 900 million actually of adjustments, all positive this time. We had some losses in some cases from the derivatives we've mentioned before, but there's also large, massive increases in property valuation, stormwater, and other factors. In summation, look, from the financial perspective, the capital expenditure, approximately $1.5 billion against a budget of $1.7 billion. Asset values, by that capital expenditure drive, vested assets and the valuation exercise, we've now got an asset value of $42.2 billion. And gross debt levels, $7.3 billion, which is below forecast. We were anticipating about 7.5 at the 30th of June. So some good positive financial results, coping well with the growth in the region. I won't go through all of these, just for your information though. These are some of the more significant infrastructure projects, or in effect some of them are programs that occurred during the financial year. And in those alone, you're seeing over $1 billion worth of work out of the $1.5 billion of investment that was undertaken. Resourcing changes, obviously that push for investment to meet the demands and the population growth requires resourcing to be looked at as to how we actually deliver those services. So total staff, full-time equivalents, so converting to a full-time basis, 9,678. So that is up 208 on last year. And our total staff costs, $792 million across the entire group, remember. That is up $63 million on last year. Interestingly, they're looking at where we do stand right now. If you're looking at the full-time equivalent count, since we came into existence, our population is up by around about 10%, but the FTEs, full-time equivalent staff, are down by about 3% compared to pre-amalgamation. About 276 staff down compared to like-for-like basis as well as we can. Look, all of that is, the resourcing drive is primarily a direct consequence of that growth, what's been occurring, both in just literally activity levels and the demands for services. And Council continues to constantly examine how we do resource those services, what's the best, most cost effective and best for the customer. An interesting little indicator, if you do look at our cash flow, is their operational cash flow. So this is physically the amount we're paying either staff or suppliers, so either providing the service in-house or providing it through external suppliers. The total cash paid to them was within 0.5%. So we spent about $2.2 billion and within a few $1 million, $10 million or so of that number. Examples of where that FTE count has come up over the last year, that 208 mentioned. Look, 42 were in the building the resource consenting area. So literally the scale of operation has grown with the growth in the region, the development occurring. So 42 extra FTEs were brought on board, around about a $3 million bill incurred there. Now, building resource consents, a substantial portion of that is then recovered through consenting fees. The Housing Project Office, as you're aware, has gained massive momentum, building a lot of strategic housing areas. 9 FTE equivalents were brought in for that team. Auckland Transport, a large proportion, 116 FTEs in there, literally to deliver that massive program they had of works, investing, maintaining, operating these systems.
How many was that?
116 FTEs. Watercare also had about 58 FTEs. It's about hard to quantify exactly how much that is, because that was a bit of a shuffle between repairs and maintenance versus internal. Some of their lab staff were brought in-house, but also their program for the maintenance service team was the largest proportion of those extra FTEs. Some of the one-offs, I mean, the LTP engagement, record number of submissions coming in, required a lot of support, as well as the supporting the independent hearings panel for the unitary plan. Major events during that financial year, which required around about $2.3 million of extra resourcing to support those. And one little example there is animal management has been brought in-house, as you probably be aware. So that actually resulted in close to $1 million saving, because what we've done is stopped paying outside parties to deliver those services, and we're paying an extra 48 FTEs to deliver that service instead. Much more cost-effective model. Debt is always of interest. Look now, and our debt interest costs remain within our prudential limits. We have those set through Treasury policy, and we are within all of those. Supported by a large income stream, $3.6 billion of income now coming into the organisation to support those interest repayments on that debt, and obviously backed up by $42 billion worth of assets. And most important indicator probably is that external one, which is both Standard & Poor's and Moody's have maintained their high credit ratings, some of the highest you'll get in New Zealand. So, in a summary, delivered extensive investment in the city, $1.5 billion of works undertaken. Achieved the saving target within those results, $183 million now per annum, and that will continue to grow. Overall resourcing levels are in line with budget. Staff are up, external resourcing down. We achieved that. And ultimately a strong group financial performance. Anticipating a small deficit, but we actually end up achieving an $80 million surplus across the group. So all of that looks favourable, and that actually sets a very solid foundation for that next 10-year plan that we have just adopted. So a reasonably short slide on obviously what is a very large set of activities.
Thank you, Kevin. Councillor Wayne Walker.
Sure. This is all really great. My question is around how we communicate this to the public at large. I would suggest there's a way of communicating information using pictures that are very easy to understand. And one of the real messages that we need to get across is that this big increase in FTEs, the number of people that we're employing, and the increase in our staff is very much because we're doing more business, and we actually recover on that. So if we could have something that shows the increase in dollar terms, the increase in staff terms, and the relationship between that and the recovery that we're getting, so that people understand that it's not increasing their rates, that in fact we may be making efficiency gains in that area, and that we show that pictorially so they can see it, it would be much easier for us to get the message across.
Okay, look, through the chair, if I can, there's a couple of quick comments. One is, the summary annual report. So there's the 3 large volumes, but the summary annual report's got a lot of pictorial information, including some of the infographics and things which cover that. The simplest way, though, is the rates are set at the start of the year, and we actually achieved an $80 million surplus. So the rates that were set achieved all that had to happen, despite the massive area of growth that occurred, the increasing services, the investment in the city. It was all achieved within rates.
Yep. I understand that. Having said that, the difficulty I have is that when I try and explain something to someone and I start throwing numbers around and words, they don't get it. But you can actually demonstrate it very easily with pictures, very simply. So that's one question.
Yep.
The other question is around the capital projects listing, and particularly the stadium upgrades and renewals. I have a concern, and I think that's been expressed by other councils around the spending on the stadium strategy. My understanding is that that's on hold at this point, but I still see a number of numbers in here. So I just put a question mark around whether we're not going to spend some of this money, certainly until we know that there's a need for it.
That's not his thing to do, is it, at the moment?
And I'm talking about spending on
Councillor Walker, is
Mount
that in the
Smart,
budget update?
QBE, Western Springs.
I thought it was.
Which item are you actually referring to there? Is that the actual budget update?
That's the budget update.
So future focus, rather than
Capital
last year's?
projects listing. Yeah.
Yeah, okay, yeah. So well, that's actually looking forward. There'll be some discussion on that item coming up, rather than looking to the 14-15 financial year. Yep.
Yeah. That's what I thought. Yeah. Thank you. Councillor and I.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just following up from that, we've all read in the paper recently the comments by Councillor Brewer about the extra staff and high costs. This tells a completely different story. And I think it's extremely important that this message be put out, as Wayne has just said, in very simple communication to the public to come on the journey with us, because we are making progress on behalf of this. Right now they're confused because the media is telling them something completely different. And this is our opportunity with this type of information to clear the picture out there and get the people on side to understand that we are making some savings and we are moving forward. Thank you.
Yeah.
Yep.
Thank you. Councillor Casey.
2 questions. The staff thing's been dealt with. I'm interested in consultant costs over the amalgamation period, because it's another indicator that people use. If staff's going down or consultants going up, I'm happy to get that offline, but that's one of my indicators. Secondly, I'm interested in how we are getting the bulky documents out to the public and whether it's accessible in terms of sight impairment, because that was another issue of the past. So give me some comfort that it's going to all libraries and service centres, and can people ask and receive a hard print copy of any part of it, or just the summary?
The hard copies will be available in all of our communities, the service centres, the libraries and things. We are pushing the digital because it is actually a very interactive model. You can actually go into the summary and then drill through the pieces you do need, and the summary document is quite digestible. If people are requesting copies, we can make it available for them, yes.
And the accessibility of it in terms of...
Yeah, I'll have to check up on exactly on the web-based version, the accessibility of that. Yeah, I'll follow up on that and come back to you.
Impairment.
Yes, sight impaired, yep.
Thank you. Councillor Cooper.
Thank you. Couple of things. I mean, I think that what has been really quite disheartening over the time of the SHA development is people keep saying, well, how many houses are being built? Well, it shows here that we've got an increase of 6% in building consents, but it's the building inspections that shows that more houses are being built, and that's really heartening. So 5% building inspections actually means the houses are being built because someone's going out and to see how it's done. So I'm very pleased to see that. So that will answer some of those disparaging remarks and questions that come at us around how we're responding to growth. So I think that's really important. And also, I echo Councillor Anai's comments around misinformation. I mean, I did see the little fine print corrections in the Herald, but you never see the corrections in the large print, and I think that's very heartening to see that we're responding to large growth, but we're not matching percent for percent in growth of staff, and that will put pressure on our staff. And I want to acknowledge that. It's very easy to say you can have too many staff, but how hard do you flog your staff as well? It's got to be about being a good employer as well. So I think we've made a fine balance there.
Thank you. I'll move the recommendation. I got a seconder, Councillor Cashmore. Thank you. Any other comments, Councillor Cashmore?
Yes, thanks, Madam Chair. I congratulate you, gentlemen, on the report and also on the diagrammatics in the third volume. It spells out like this. I'm already using that in public presentations. A question I have is about around the $80 million surplus. We've got 10 million from extra consents, 11 from commercial, dividends an extra 15 million, 38 million from the EMU grant. Was that from the government?
Yeah. It was a timing issue there. It was just received earlier than anticipated,
Okay.
so we didn't have it budgeted in this particular financial year.
Cool. And my second question, if I may, Madam Chair, is to do with the weather tightness provisions. And I asked this question to the officers from the Auditor of the Auditor General, and looking forward, that the weather tightness provisions are sort of changing from houses to apartments, to potentially bigger one-off hits, as we saw with the Nautilus. Have we got some quantitative work on that for budget projections going forward?
Can I?
Kevin,
Through you, Madam Chair. That work is done by the team that are actually looking after the whole weather tightness thing internally, in conjunction with the actuaries, because obviously we don't know what we don't know, so we're having to make some assumptions, and they're continually updating those assumptions as they get closer, and that's what's driven this. In the budget, we'd expected the weather tightness provision to go down, and it's actually gone up, and it's because of that move. So we've already started to affect that, but obviously as time goes on, we will get better and better and harder information on how that is moving, whether there's a big move to that or whether it's just going to be a one-off and then it's going to stabilise. I think our reading is that it could carry on increasing, which means that we might be seeing some increase. But at this stage, I don't think we should. But maybe you could.
So the only thing I wanted to do, and it's really just by way of assurance, so what you're seeing here in terms of weather tightness are really the book entries to reflect the fair value of the provision we need to think about making for the future. So there is a direct mirror image of that in our LTP cash projections. So we have I think I might have forwarded it through to you the other day, Councillor Cashmore. Yeah, so in the order of 50 million per annum over the next 3 or 4 years is provided for within our LTP budgets, and then there's a bit of a gradual tail towards years sort of 7 to 10. But look, there's a rigorous actuarial process. We pick that up annually, and we adjust our forward budgets accordingly.
I just wanted to get some confidence around the fact they potentially could be big ticket items, and you obviously got it. Well, we don't know what we don't know, as Francis says, which is the scary part.
Yeah. If I can just add one last piece to that, just to give another degree of assurance, and that is that it wasn't long ago this provision was up around $500 million. Yeah. So it's not as if we're suddenly gone, this is down to 276, even allowing for this adjustment. So it's still trending down over time. It's just we've had a bit of a blip now because of this multi-unit thing. So it's still much less than it was a few years ago.
And my final comment, Madam Chair, would just to thanks the financial staff and Kevin and Matthew for the team for the work. The Officer of the General had no substantive issues whatsoever. It was a clean pass, and a congratulations on the 3-check audit process. So thank you and well done.
Thank you. Councillor Quacks.
I accept what you say in regards to the staff numbers, but can you just tell me how many people are now earning over $300,000 compared with 2013 over the group, across the group, and what kind of increases is that been?
So over 300,000. Yep. So looking at these, as at 15 over 300,000, we've got 36 And that's including the entire group, including ports and all the other operations.
And what was that 2 years ago, Kevin, 3 years ago?
Couldn't tell you 2 or 3 years ago. I haven't got that available now.
Is it correct that the staffing budget was $63 million over budget this year?
Yes.
Right. Well, why is that? I know we talk about growth, but surely we see growth coming.
Look, yeah, it
doesn't happen at the last minute.
No, it doesn't, and some of those reasons were given. I mean, for instance, reasonably small on the scale, but the insourcing for animal management was an example where a commercial decision was made during that financial year to change how those resources were delivered. In the case of building resource consent, there was allowance there. We're actually down on our external resourcing because it was decided that with the growth occurring, let's do it through more internal people. Sometimes the judgment call in those peak areas is you have to actually assess, should I actually bring staff on now, or should we wait and find out if it's a temporary aberration? Yeah. So the call was made, let's bring more people on board, let's get employees who actually do cost less than external people to process applications and do those areas. So as a combination of factors, yep. It's the budget is best information at the time. Obviously what we do is then look to meet the overall budget for the organisation as a whole, and that definitely has been achieved. So balancing the resourcing internally during that financial year to meet the services.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you. If there's no more questions or comments, sorry, Al.
Sorry, I just, Kevin, look, just on what, and this is where my head, I want to get clear in my head, around staff and around how we cater for that growth. Mm-hmm. You mentioned in the PowerPoint there was a 10% increase since amalgamation, and it's around 135,000 people.
132.
132?
32,
okay. Yep, 132,000 people. Thank you, Dick. So, is it good practice? I mean, for us, I know it's a decision that we have to make, but I'm just trying to think whether it's good practice to say, look, maybe in the next, or the term of the long-term plan, let's start hiring another 80, 90 people with the growth that's coming up, because I think no matter what happens, if you do that or you don't, you're going to get hammered anyway.
Budget for it.
I don't know whether,
Yeah, look, and that is part of the resourcing discussions that the chief executive and the executive team have to have. Is we know the objectives you'd like to achieve, the outcomes. We know what the budget is through the rating and other mechanisms. How are we now going to juggle the resourcing to actually achieve that in the best way possible and deliver the customer service? So, yep, there is anticipation, and the long-term plan just adopted was based on certain assumptions around those levels of growth. The 132,000 and the specific 43,000 or so for the current year, 14-15 just finished, was higher than anticipated.
Yeah, and I think that's where I don't envy the position that you will be placed around, do we get the staff now? Because if you do, you're going to get hammered. Or let's wait to see what actually happens, and you're still going to get hammered. Yeah. Okay, thank you.
That's just, you're too slow. Thank you, Councillor Watson.
Just the other side of the coin, and you can perhaps help me explain a little bit, the severance payments that are going out for the last couple of financial years for the group seem to be 600 odd K in total. Is that an aberration, or is that something that we see as being a trend? Is there, I know the whole unitary plan gig could go some way, but could you just explain whether that's a trend or it's just sort of a passing fancy?
Probably the easiest way to answer that is to say we do not budget for it. What happens during a year is made for good reasons. There may be redesigns to meet the outcomes of what the organisation is trying to achieve. We amalgamated, it literally was, 5 years ago, was still a reasonably short time in assessing what the needs are going forward in those resourcing. So, look, no, we do not budget for it, so it's not anticipated to be a trend. It'll occur if that's the right decision to meet customer needs and the right commercial basis at the time.
Be interesting to know how many of those people who left actually got poached because they were continually told they got paid too much.
Yeah.
And as a dairy farmer friend of mine said the other day, our chief executive gets paid over $4 million and our payout's gone down. Get it into perspective sometimes. Right, okay, it's been moved and seconded. I'm going to put it. All those in favour? Aye. Against? Carried. Thank you very much, councillors. We'll move on to the budget updates. Is this Kevin or... Oh, Ross. Hi, Ross and Tanya and... Oh. Yes, Karen? Sorry, Tanya. And Matthew.
So, councillors, if I can just very quick intro, and Ross will step you through this. Got Andrew Guthrie here as well around the City Centre program. But just to be clear, what you're looking at here, you've obviously quite recently adopted the LTP program, including the 10-year forward CapEx program. The bulk of this item is just business as usual. It's talking about the follow-on impacts from the year-end process, where across the family, staff need to look at projects that haven't been fully completed in the last financial year, and therefore it's necessary simply to adjust our forward schedules to roll over some of those projects where it's appropriate and reflect those in a revised budget for the next 1 to 2 years. So that was the first point I really just wanted to make, is that's what we're focused on here. It's just a natural part of the year-end process. Take stock where we're at on certain projects, what money needs to be rolled forward to adjust our budgets. The second thing I wanted to emphasise is the team here and many others have worked extremely hard with local boards. So this has involved a reasonably significant amount of projects in the local space. It's been worked very hard over the last 6 to 8 weeks. And look, I'd like to thank the staff. I think evidence of the fact that it's been a good discussion is there aren't any local boards here today with any particular axe to grind, and indeed the chair did mention that there was one chair who wanted to come along and say well done. So just to give you the assurance that that channel and those conversations have been worked very hard in preparing these papers. So Ross, if you want to just step through.
Okay, thank you. So the monthly budget update report is quite a large one this month, so we've just got a few slides here that myself and Andrew Guthrie will talk through, just to make it a bit easier to understand the content that's there. So the report itself, there's really 3 parts to it. The first part is the business as usual year-end budget timing changes that Matthew talked about. So these adjustments, they happen every year. They're largely timing changes, predominantly CapEx, but there's also some small OpEx timing changes as well. It is business as usual. It's something that happens every year, but the LTP did make things a little bit different. So within the council parent, typically we've had large project lists, but then delivery hasn't lived up to delivering all those projects, so things get carried forward, and that's built up quite a bit of a bow wave. The LTP was in a bit of a reset when all of the funding levels were looked at again, so that put some of those projects at risk, particularly in the local space. So we anticipated that in the LTP. We looked at what projects were in flight, things that were underway, or projects that were ready to go, and we anticipated there'd be a need for about 60 million of projects that needed to be carried forward out of the current year, predominantly local board projects. Now that the numbers are in, now we've got the final year-end results, the final number of projects in that category is 65 million, of which it's for the 65 million for the council parent in total, of which 47 relate to local boards. So essentially, we've made enough financial provision in the first few years of the long-term plan to accommodate carrying forward all of the local board projects that are in flight. We've got the built-up expectations that those projects will be delivered in a timely manner. So things are generally in this category timing changes. There are some exceptions, and the city centre projects that we'll talk about later is probably the key exception there. Also in the report there's CCO movements, CCO CapEx timing changes, and a few CCO OpEx timing changes are mentioned. There's also a recommendation there around a reclassification for ATEED for the digital platform, just transferring a request to reclassify some operating expenditure as capital expenditure. So recommendations A to D are really in that sort of year-end budget update timing changes bit. The rest of the report covers two other items. So one is the city centre projects that Andrew Guthrie will talk about shortly, which are generally associated with the city centre targeted rate. And then the last item relates to Auckland Transport's budget changes. So there was obviously a lot of movements later in the piece in developing the long-term plan. The numbers that Auckland Transport submitted to us, they've changed and updated since then. Those numbers have already come through and been incorporated into the Auckland Transport statement of intent. What they are is effectively changes in revenue and expenditure, so both have moved in step, but still working to the same bottom line. So this is just asking you to formally update the group's budgets to reflect those adjustments. So just looking at the sort of total CapEx delivery for the council parent, this is showing the trend. So the green bars are the last 3 years, and then the blue and the red is what's happening for the next 3 years. So you can see there that the year just gone, for the 14-15 financial year, in the council parent we delivered 50 million more projects than in the past, and then the target for next financial year, year one of the LTP, is another 50 million. So we've got a target of just over 500 million of projects to be delivered for the parent, much more than we've done in the past. And the intention is to have a list of capital projects that is both deliverable and fundable, so that we deliver to the community pretty much what we say we're going to deliver. So then we've got the 65 million comes in across the next first 5 years of the long-term plan, the bulk of it hitting years 2 and 3, and there's some small amounts in the outer years. So just in terms of the timing there, what we can't do is just accommodate all of those projects that didn't get delivered this year into year one of the LTP, plus everything that was already there. There needs to be, because the 500 million is already a stretch target, there needs to be a bit of smoothing the program out over the 3 years. But what that means, so what we've done is looked at all of the individual projects and said when are individual projects likely to be delivered, and there's naturally lots of timing changes that occur just naturally. So we've reviewed all that and worked through those schedules with the local boards, and the local boards haven't raised any issues. So my last slide just shows what's happened for year one of the LTP, the current financial year, the 15-16 year. This is the net movement in the CapEx budget for each of the local boards. So most of the local boards have actually got slightly more capital expenditure planned for this year than they had previously, with 3 exceptions. And those exceptions are for good reasons. So there's the Henderson Massey local board, where there's a timing change there for the Westgate Town Centre and the developments there. Similarly, in Upper Harbour, the Albany Pool is going to happen a little bit later. And the Wairua local board, the Pioneer, the Allan Melville and Pioneer Women's Hall is going to occur. So those 3 projects, more of the spend will happen in the 16-17 year. So all of the boards have got, delivered either a little bit more than we had planned in year one, or they're going to have big projects delivered in year 2, and that's why they're down in that year. So with that, I'll pass across to Andrew to talk about the city centre integration projects.
Thank you.
Thanks, Ross. Is there a... This one, can you put it up?
Yep.
Great, thank you everybody. So this will be fairly brief. As noted in the report that was provided, that there is proposed that there's a net reduction in capital expenditure for the city centre projects of about $8.7 million in the LTP period. This, and we'll come to why, but there's a number of reasons, including projects which have been reprioritised and deferred out of the period, and also an increase in city centre targeted rate funding contribution to those projects as opposed to general rate. And then the second element of this is that there's an increase in operational expenditure proposed for the LTP, which is fully funded by city centre targeted rate. And if I could take you to the slide here. The two slides which are provided up front in this report, I'm not going to go into any detail, but what we wanted to demonstrate is that there's a through the Auckland City Centre Advisory Board, which advises on the expenditure of the city centre targeted rate and all matters city centre. There's a fairly robust process being developed around the evaluation of current and potential projects and expenditure in the city centre for both capital works and operational projects. We've been through the LTP list and outstanding projects and gone through a prioritisation process. Over that period of time, what the advisory board has endorsed is some recommendations, some changes to the LTP. So on this list here of note, there's proposed an increased allocation of targeted rate funding of $7.4 million to projects such as the Beach Road Cycleway, Freiburg Square and Myers Park Stage 2. And I'll come to some numbers in a minute. In addition, there's proposed a new project to be fully funded from City Centre targeted rate, which is about enhancing the Auckland Transport cycle network along Karangahape Road. So it's broadening it to improve the public amenity in those spaces. There's a number of changes highlighted through the LTP around the timing. So again, re-looking at the timing and the interdependencies with various projects, there are some timing changes for budget allocation. And then through the reprioritisation process, we've looked at some of the projects with the advisory board around deferral or deletion of minor streetscape projects which have been carried forward from a previous time, and for a number of reasons, including some uncertainty around projects such as the effects of the CRL, and if you look at, there was a project there for Beresford Square. We've considered it appropriate that we defer that as a project until more is known around the City Rail Link effects in that area. And so there has been a reduction of $14.7 million proposed through the LTP. The next sheet is a capture from the more detailed pack for you of the city centre capital projects, and showing on the right hand side there the allocation to targeted rate for those projects. And then the following slide or sheet picks up the variances in there. And so just in very broad terms, and picking up on the bullet points that I've talked to you previously, there's a number of projects which are recommended for deletion or deferral in the yellow there. There's the bulk of the projects, there is no change from the LTP. There are some where there is zero net effect, but the timing of some of the expenditure is highlighted there, the blue projects. And then the last tranche of projects there is showing where the advisory board is recommending additional allocation of targeted rate for either existing or new projects. So again, 100% funded through the targeted rate as opposed to a general rate. The final slide there is around projects which are new to the LTP, and they are operational expenditure as a broad category, and these are initiatives in the city centre which the advisory board has endorsed as being appropriate for allocation of city centre targeted rate, 100%, and they are things like the destination marketing in the area, thereabouts, a contribution towards the wayfinding signage improvements in the city centre. There's some work around how do we activate and improve the amenity in the city centre during this period of transformation ahead of us. All areas of work which are considered to be of significant benefit directly within the city centre to businesses, residents and visitors. And so those are proposed as additions to the LTP, fully funded through city centre targeted rate. That's me, so happy to take any questions on that. Thank you.
Thank you. Right, questions, councillors?
Is this on both?
Both, Councillor Cashmore.
Yes, thanks, Madam Chair. Thanks, team. So the city centre targeted rate has a variance at the end of the LTP period of basically 2.5 million. So the actual targeted rate will probably remain the same. No need for it to increase.
There's no intent to increase the targeted rate levy, no.
Okay,
So there is a projected surplus of targeted rate currently through the 10-year period. This is how do we spend it.
Cool, thank you. And my other question is to you, Ross. So last year we had the CapEx delivery of 92% in the annual report. So you project through to the next 3 years. You're talking here in your pictorial. Those figures they've been steadily improving. Are we accounting for a continued steady delivery of CapEx delivery per budget? Is what it's shown here?
Yes, so going forward into the LTP, we're not projecting, we're not anticipating that we won't deliver what we say we're going to do. What we're planning to do is what we're budgeting for. There's no, other than these carry forwards coming in, there's no other timing adjustments built in.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Casey.
CCTR, City Centre...
Targeted rate. Sorry, CCTR, City Centre targeted rate.
Evaluation criteria, which is what I'm looking for. The group itself is called the City Centre...
It's the Auckland City Centre Advisory Board.
Advisory Board.
And
right.
Councillor Lee is the elected representative on that board.
That was my question. So Councillor Lee is represented on there. Because I've never been along to it, this is a tangential question which you can answer me offline, but I was reading through all your evaluation criteria about streetscapes and making it a welcoming, better place to live. And I'm really concerned about defensive architecture, and I'm concerned that 3 businesses have already installed drenchers for the homeless. So I'd like some comment back, not now, but by return, about whether you are looking into the whole area of defensive architecture. And I want to know from you, and I also want to know what you're going to do about the drenchers. Because I can't seem to get anybody to do anything. I just wanted to say it's an issue, and I think it's in your court now that I've seen your evaluation, and I'd like to talk to you about it. In fact, I probably would like to come along to one of your meetings and formally talk to you about it. So that's good. Second question is really about the long list of projects, capital projects. I'm looking at our page 13. I'm halfway down where it says Town Centre Renewal Mount Albert, 3.3 million from the Albert Eden Local Board. I'm needing some comfort from you that you're also scoping and keeping in mind the project around that, which is Auckland Transport's funding of a pedestrian overbridge from the Mount Albert station, without which no town centre will ever take place. That you're not just looking at that town centre budget line in isolation. Thank you.
Yeah.
Through the chair, Councillor, I spoke to Auckland Transport about that a few days ago, so they're working with the local board on that. They're looking at various options around how you can fund it and how we can actually obtain funding. How Auckland Transport and the local board can fund it through either the Auckland Transport Local Board Transport Fund, and also how they can potentially achieve some NZTA funding to get the project off the ground.
Stop. Auckland Transport have presented to this council and to the councillors that it is fully funded by Auckland Transport. I have that in writing from the Chief Executive, who now seems to be refusing to answer emails and letters from the councillors or myself. So to hear that you're negotiating with the local board for part funding from the local board is news to me.
Through the chair, I was only advised by Auckland Transport that the actual project itself sits below the prioritisation line. So
since when?
Through the LTP.
So maybe somebody can please enlighten me, because the Mount Albert public is expecting Auckland Transport to fund something they promised to fund in a public meeting, I might add. And if that's not going to happen, I need to get that in writing from the Chief Executive, and so does Councillor Fletcher.
We can follow up on that.
Through the Chair, I can follow up. But through the Chair, my belief, my understanding, it has been funded, or been looked to be funded through the Auckland Transport Local Board Fund that sits within Transport. So that might,
That's fine.
Yeah.
So it's still Auckland Transport funding and not local board funding?
No, does Transport have the $10 million per annum local board transport fund?
So that means that other projects in Mount Albert will not be funded because the money from it. No, that's not it. That's not it.
Councillor Casey,
Auckland Transport have said they would fund the pedestrian overbridge. I have it in writing. If that's changed, somebody needs to tell me.
Councillor Casey, there is a local board transport fund per se, my understanding, and it will be funded out of that.
It's not an Albert Eden local board.
It's not
That's
the
fine.
local board
Yes,
funding it. It is that
okay, that's cool.
bucket of money that they can use.
Very cool. Thank you very much for your answer.
Thank you.
Great.
Right. If there's no other, I will move the recommendation. Councillor Cooper, did you want to ask?
I just wanted to ask, and it might have been covered in the amendment, but I've been back to my office for 2 days to pick it up out of the thing. Just with your yellow projects that have been deleted or deferred, it's all up in this area on this one. So does that get picked up anywhere else, or does it go beyond 25? Because it's just, this is such a awful area and it really needs work, but are we just leaving that until we work out what to do with it, or?
So some of those projects, for instance, there's noting there that Ford Street, the consideration around that was that the bulk of the work has been done on that project. And
I'm thinking probably more Upper Queen Street,
Yep.
Beresford, that sort of.
So those ones there, the intent is that they will be picked up through other significant pieces of work. So, for instance, the Auckland Transport works around CRL will pick up some of those works.
Okay.
And I guess one of the things to emphasise too is that the city centre targeted rate has, there is a significant amount of unallocated spend there. And it's obviously it increases each year. So we would anticipate that we will be taking projects to the advisory board and then to this committee over time and introducing new projects, and those may come back into the mix.
So just this AATIA precinct will be dealt with in other ways.
Yes, that's right.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you.
Okay, so it's been moved and seconded. Councillor Cashmore. All those in favour? Aye. Against? Carried. Thank you very much. Thank you, staff. Thank you, guys. Enormous amount of work being done here. Item 13, rating on small accommodation, and we note that Councillor and I has got a conflict of interest on this. He declared at the beginning of the meeting.
Madam Chair,
yes.
This was an interest of mine, and I think the report is very, very clear, and I'm happy to move it.
Okay, thank you. Moved by Councillor Fletcher. Have I got a seconder for it? Mr Mayor, thank you. Do you want to ask any questions, Councillor Fletcher?
No.
Right, Andrew, you may be off the hook. Any other questions or comments? All those in favour?
Aye.
Against? Carried. Thank you. Moving on. Thank you, Matthew. Anthony. Andrew. Sorry.
He did nothing.
Item 14, procurement strategy implementation update. Dean and Sarah. Welcome. We're going to finish to lunchtime. Excellent.
15. Oh no, we've had 15.
The 12-year-old birthday party to go to.
Brandy.
Yep.
That's all right, don't worry.
Welcome, Dean.
Thank you very much. And certainly thank you very much, councillors, for the opportunity to present to you on an update on procurement strategy. Just to reposition you, over this year we've been bringing to you on a regular basis, once every 2 months, some of the areas that we're working on within the organisation to improve process. So you'll have heard us talk about, we had Sarah Sinclair in here talking about coastal erosion and some of the work we're doing there on a policy and a planning design sense. You've heard us talk about some of the changes that we're bringing into the way that we're thinking about regulatory approval. So there's been a series of these opportunities to update you on things that we believe will speed up the pace and improve the quality of what we do and how we do it as an organisation. The presentation we're about to get now, led by Sarah, is exactly in that vein. It's about our approach as an organisation on procurement. So thank you for your attention, and we certainly look forward to any questions on it. And a subject I know that we're all interested in. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks, Dean. So thank you for the opportunity to come and talk about procurement today. I know I'm the only thing standing between you and the end of this meeting, so I will try and make it interesting for you. I suppose I want to acknowledge first of all that the governing body endorsed or approved a new procurement strategy and procurement policy about midway through last year. I started at council in February this year, and although we had a new set of guiding principles, we really hadn't embedded a change in the way that we do business. So the first thing that I had on my desk on day one was the procurement manual sitting on my keyboard, and I picked it up and thought, A, it's a rather large document, which is sort of the prescriptive approach that council was taking to procurement, but B, I noted that it hadn't been updated since about 2011. So what we've been doing over the last 7-8 months is actually embedding that procurement strategy and our new approach to procurement into the way that we do business. So I just want to take you through effectively how we're doing that at a reasonably high level, but jump in if you've got any questions throughout. I can take questions as we go along. So for me, the essence of strategic procurement is how you can use procurement as a lever to positively impact on your organisational outcomes. And in the past at council, procurement was focused 100% on the sourcing process, so going to market, running tenders. The procurement team was resourced up around sourcing, but it didn't have the capability or capacity to be looking broader across the enterprise at opportunities to take a strategic approach to procurement. It was really reactive. So if the business needed something procured, we'd go to market and procure it for them. If a contract was expiring, we'd manage that reactive trigger, but there was no proactive strategic procurement happening. I'll just skip through. So effectively, these are the outcomes that we're trying to have a positive impact on. If you're not cognizant of the impacts procurement can have, you can actually have a negative impact on some of these outcomes. So looking at the procurement strategy and the policy and the way that council procurement was being undertaken, we've identified 4 high-level streams of work or gaps that we're focusing on now. I fully expect those focus areas to change as we mature and progress through this journey, but for the next 12 months, these are our focus areas. Sorry, just calling out that not only do we have overarching regional drivers, we also have some individual local board outcomes that we want to positively impact as well. And in the past, if you think of the prescriptive procurement manual, it was very much a one-size-fits-all approach, and so you couldn't react to differing priorities or requirements when you had the single one-size-fits-all approach. So the first focus area for procurement is this notion of being a bit more commercial. So that doesn't mean that we need to pretend that we are a commercial entity, but we need to understand A, the markets that we're playing in, B, the levers that we can apply to get a positive outcome, and C, move away from that tactical sourcing piece and bring it up a level. So the two major things that we've done in this stream of work to date is we've implemented a new operating model that moves away from just that pure sourcing piece and actually adds resource in what we call category management, which is that looking across the enterprise for similar goods or services, matching it to market capability and taking that approach to the market. And downstream we've implemented what we call supplier relationship management. So we have more of an end-to-end approach to procurement now rather than just that middle bit. That's a bit sort of procurement mumbo-jumbo, so I'll move on from there. And we've also implemented a new structure that supports that operating model. So the second stream that we are focusing on out of the 4 is this concept of becoming a customer of choice.
We
Now,
sure are. We are the game in town.
well, so people will absolutely do business with us. That doesn't mean that we're a pleasure to do business with.
Oh,
And when you're not a pleasure to do business with, you pay for it. So there is real tangible value to be had by becoming a customer of choice. A bunch of that is around taking the cost of doing business with us out, or reducing it significantly. And for me, there's a spectrum of things that we can be doing in this space, right down from paying our bills on time, through to what are we doing to remove barriers for suppliers, especially our local suppliers, to trial innovation on us, that they could potentially get a large local government contract tick that could make their product or idea or approach exportable. But that's the big spectrum, right? In the middle, it's just plain old contract management, supplier performance management, and there's a lot that we can do to improve discipline and approach in that space. So there's a big spectrum of work that we're doing under this stream, but there's opportunity throughout. One of the things that we're doing here, and that hopefully you'll all see shortly, is we are starting to publish our Forward Works program for procurement, our pipeline of procurement activity. At the moment, we have a piece of work, we put it on the market, and we expect everyone to be able to put forward their best resources or their best response, but they had no idea it was coming, right? There's a bit of work happening in the infrastructure space, as be the only place that we provide Forward Works programs to the market. So it's one of the things that we're going to do to help A, get a better outcome for us, but B, be easier to engage for our supply markets. So our third stream of work is more of a culture piece internally. I'm sure you've all had interactions with procurement staff in previous lives where they are the sort of giant handbrake, right? They like to say no. It's about giving you all these hoops to jump through. We need to change that internally. The only reason procurement is here is to help our business deliver what they need to deliver and make sure they get the right goods at the right time at the right cost. So this is sort of my pet stream, and it is more of a culture piece. One of the things that we're doing, if you think of the manual that I spoke about, we're going live on the 1st of October with a new digitised manual. We shouldn't expect our internal customers to have to read a book this thick to figure out how they procure something. And so we're making that a lot more customer friendly, and we've done a co-design process with our internal customers to make sure that they understand what they have to do to go through the procurement process. The final stream that we need to focus on is about the dollars, right? There is huge opportunity in procurement to deliver value for money, and it's a key part of what we need to do strategically as well. So this is a focus. This is just bringing this to the front, rather than it being an assumption that procurement realises they need to deliver on this. It's calling it out. So those are the 4 streams. Just a quick list, I'm not going to rattle through all of that, of what we've delivered to date, but it's around the new frameworks, operating models, structure, delivered some savings. We have kicked off engagement with the local boards. There's a working group of local board chairs who are focused on procurement. The next session that we've got on in a month is around identifying and removing barriers for doing business with council. I thought I'd call out, even though we haven't gone live with our new procurement processes to support the procurement strategy, we are taking a strategic approach to procurement already in some instances. It's just more opportunistic than systemic at the moment. So here's a few examples of where we are using procurement as that strategic lever. We're doing some work with community groups, but also leveraging our large strategic supplier relationships to help enable those community engagements as well. That's about getting additional value from our large, valuable supplier relationships. I'm not going to rattle through them, but if anyone's got any specific questions around what we've done to date from a strategic procurement perspective, happy to answer them. And just a quick look at what we're focusing on for the next 12 months as well. One of the things that we are doing, that we've kicked off the trial already a little bit earlier than what we'd forecasted, was what we call AT PACE. So that's it's a common framework used by NZTA and Auckland Transport for measuring supplier performance. So when a supplier does business with the majority of large civil procurers, they know how their performance will be managed, but it's more of a disciplined approach. That means that suppliers don't wait until the end of their 3-year contract to be told they didn't do a good job. It's actually real-time feedback, so there's corrective action on the go whilst you go through the contract. It's one of the things I wanted to call out. So that, in a very quick nutshell, is procurement and our update. Happy to answer any questions.
Well, thank you very much, and I mean, it's very good to hear that one size doesn't fit all, because that is a concern for some people in our area. And one of the off-putting things that people find, especially if they're smaller operators, is they actually end up with 25 pages that they've got to fill in.
Yep.
You know, everyone knows you've got to have a health and safety plan, and you know, you hear some fairly horrendous stories about the amounts of money. I mean, a community group, for example, says, well, actually, we can do that job on those courts for probably 100,000 or 150,000 less than what council are doing, and we're willing to raise the money to do it, but then they have to fill in a form.
They couldn't jump through the hoops.
Absolutely. So they all go, put it in the too hard basket.
Yeah, and so when I say we're redesigning that manual, that's not just looking at the processes, that's looking at the tools that we use throughout those processes as well. So we've redesigned all of our requests for proposals, requests for tenders, requests for quote documentation to make them A, easy to understand, so it's not all procurement jargon, but B, much simpler. And when we say a fit-for-purpose approach rather than a one-size-fits-all, we're looking at more of a matrix approach. So if your risk is down here and the value's down here, then they shouldn't be having to follow the same process for a $20 million project with high risk. So it's just making it adjustable, relevant.
Yeah, no, thank you for that. Councillor Quacks.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair, and Sarah, thank you and for all the hard work that you've done over the last couple of months. And I think the Chair summed it up very well, why we're doing this work, and in particular becoming the choice becoming a customer of choice for our suppliers. Because that hasn't always been the case in the past, simply because of the hoops that suppliers have had to go through.
That's right.
And you've just summed it up very well, Chair, you know, a document that thick is just, and so those kind of, they're costs, and the cost barriers that are insurmountable for a number of small suppliers. So that's not the only reason. It's an opportunity to cement a better relationship with our suppliers, but it also is an opportunity for us to increase the market in certain areas where currently we don't have a large market. If we have better relationships with our suppliers, that means that the market is bigger, becomes more competitive, and it provides. So it's a win-win situation for both this council and for the many businesses that we do business with. I think currently we have about, 12,000 suppliers. So it's a huge number of suppliers. Obviously, a lot of those are very small ones, but the work that's being done by Sarah and her team is a welcome, and it's a breath of fresh air, quite frankly. So my committee are very grateful and are very supportive of the work that's being done by Sarah and her team.
Would you like to move the recommendation,
I will,
Councillor Quacks?
absolutely.
Thank you. Councillor Walker, Chait.
Sure. Commendable work, Sarah, and I note that you've got these four areas. There's probably another area of focus, and Councillor Webster has alluded to it, and I'm sure a number of other councillors would share it, and that's around putting the local back, availing ourselves of local resources, especially voluntary resources, things that local boards would like to do differently. One of the things that we procure effectively is the management of much of our burns and the like on the part of the good people of Auckland who mow the areas outside of their house, and they do other things. I know it's transport, and it goes to the procurement on the part of Auckland Transport, and the importance of actually making it easy for people and not putting in barriers.
Madam Chair, there's a question.
I mean, right now what I'm leading to is Auckland Transport have got something out around local boards. It's actually making it incredibly difficult for people to participate in that process rather than easier. So my concern is, yes, we do procurement, but let's join it up across the organisation so it's easy for people and, frankly, can save us significant amounts of money.
Yeah, so through the chair, I'll ask Dean to provide us some information about the community engagement initiatives that they're working on. But we do see large opportunity by taking a group approach to procurement. We have kicked off a specific category approach to professional services that's across the group, so transport, water care and the other CCOs as a pilot, and the CCO, CFOs have endorsed that approach for that specific group approach to the category. And I'm sure it will prove that there's benefit in taking that group and joined up approach as well.
Look, two very quick comments. One is our procurement policy is quite clear that we need to take into account local impact. So that's an element within our policy, so I'll refer you back to that. The principles for change that Sarah outlined are how, as a team, they're approaching lifting the game across the board of what we do. It's not procurement policy, you've already signed off on that, and it definitely addresses local impact assessment. Then when it comes to, and it's come up in a couple of questions, when it comes to how we engage with communities to do smaller value capital projects, we have a very specific initiative. We've talked about it here before, and we've certainly talked about it with local boards, and it's called community-led small projects. And in effect, it is about getting council out of the way and allowing communities and local boards to agree on smaller value capital projects where the risk is low, where procurement policies can be simplified, and we can support those communities to deliver those small value projects and just get on with it. So that's a very specific initiative designed to address in large part what some of you have raised already, typically below that $250,000 level.
Thank you. Councillor Crum.
I'd like to absolutely echo Councillor Quacks's comments in regards to breath of fresh air. And as Deputy Chair of Tenders and Procurement, it has been a really good last few months with, as you rightly point out, Sarah, that proactive versus reactive field of vision for us and for the work that you're leading. And I'll also make the comment that the validated 20 million savings is nothing to be sniffed at, and they're in plain writing for us. Sarah, I thought it'd be a good idea for, an opening comment is, maybe councillors are aware, but we haven't had a pipeline to date. I still find that really fascinating, and our unsolicited proposals process is was non-existent. So there's a couple of real biggies here that you would expect we were doing and we weren't. So just notwithstanding that, two topics. One, which kind of relates, I guess, to Councillor Walker's comments. When you went out to local boards, because they've seen this presentation in the form that you took it to them, what were they drawing out as relevant for them? Local. I think it's important for us to know, when they heard your presentation, what were the take-homes for them? And then a second question, but I'll come back to that after that, in regards to pace.
Yeah, so through the chair, we focused on 3 areas with the local boards. So what was happening at a transactional level for procurement? It's my backup band. So the transactional level, and that's what I was calling the ridiculous. So I don't know, shipping the one-size-fits-all procurement approach meant that you had to ship a bottle of gas over to Great Barrier when they ran out of gas or something. Don't quote me on that, but ridiculous stuff that was happening because it didn't fit into our processes. We just have empowered staff to remove the ridiculous and empowered our suppliers. Our suppliers were scared to challenge that, so they felt heartened to have that ridiculous approach taken away. And if you say it out loud and it sounds ridiculous, it is ridiculous. So they can talk to me about it and we do something about it. So that was the transactional stuff. At the tactical level, it was all around what are the barriers for entry. So what is the barrier for their local suppliers doing business with council? So that's specifically what the next workshop will be focusing on, and I've asked them to think about what some of those are and bring them to the workshop so we can look at creating solutions rather than just having a session around what our problems are. And then the third area that we spoke about was at the strategic level. So what are the things that are really important to those local boards that we can start thinking about now and take a strategic approach to procuring them that could have not just a value for money outcome but multiple outcomes, whether that be socioeconomic and value for money. So at a high level, that's how the conversation was facilitated.
I'm sure they would have been incredibly interested.
Yep.
So just on supplier relationship management in the PACE trial,
yes.
And also added to that, progressing the idea of a pipeline, or knowing what that pipeline will be.
Yeah.
What are your challenges? Because rolling out the PACE stuff you've got an ambitious timeline.
Yeah.
Can you get that pipeline together from all groups readily, easily?
So through the chair, we're asking the business to do something that they've never done before. So business units have their own planning processes, they do their work in their own, probably multiple different ways. And there's a few things that are happening across the enterprise that are bringing that together in a more coordinated, planned approach. The procurement forward view pipeline is just one sort of skinny part of all the work that they need to do. So it has been challenging, but I think it's just that initial, I'm asking you to do something that you haven't done before. So it's the perception that I'm adding to workload potentially, but I'm confident that we will get over it. We'll get over the hurdles. We have top-level support for a lot of the things that we're doing, so ELT are really supportive, and we might need to escalate here and there to get some stuff done, but we will get there. And next year it will be much smoother as well.
And if escalation's required, would that ever come across a governance, or will it stay within management jurisdiction?
So through the chair, I think you as Tenders and Procurement Committee members will see when we haven't got it right. So now we have this pipeline, you see the projects you will from next week when I bring it to you. You will see the projects that are supposed to be coming onto your radar, and if you get surprise ones, then you'll know that something's not working. So if it's working, you shouldn't know about it. If it's not working, you'll see it anyway.
I would also, just adding to that, I would see that the process of escalating us not doing business properly is just an operational issue that we need to deal with. And we've got many examples where I think the will is absolutely there. Sometimes you just need to apply the pressure to get the right result. So to me, that's very much business as usual. But I think if we've got something wrong, you will see it. You'll hear the market, you'll hear your constituents, or you'll see it at tenders and procurement. And so we're looking to address that, but I don't see it as a governance issue per se, to be honest.
Thank you. We're doing very well in this committee. We've had a fire alarm and now we have a tsunami alert, so...
Oh!
And we might even finish before lunch.
Councillor Cooper. Thank you. I'm sure Councillor Walker's very happy. Lots of pictures, small words. Very good. Just a couple of things. One is, and I guess it's more for you, Dean, because this is fantastic work and good to hear, because we know that right from amalgamation, this is one of the small business community's biggest fears, that they would never get a chance to have any contracts, and it sort of transpired, and we were taking morning teas from here way out to Orewa, pretty crazy. So it's good to see that we'll get some local delivery by local people. But I think, and also I guess we had a perception, and I think that's why people were scared, looked like you were dealing with an elephant crossed with a dinosaur. That's who you had to deal with, you know, and I think that's going to be a lot better with a bit more of maybe a commercial kind of bringing that experience to it. But one of the things I want to say at the other end of it, Dean, is I just had a complaint from a very irate friend of mine who organised a big breakfast over at North Harbour Stadium. Well, you've got to pay in advance, and you've got to do this, and you've got to do that. And here we are paying late. We pay our suppliers late, but we're expecting our users to be paying in advance. So I think there's some real work to be done in kind of bringing that to the middle and being fair and reasonable with people and trusting our customers as well. And the other thing is just, this is great work, Accelerating Auckland, etc. There's lots of great places in West Auckland that would love to get free furniture as well. So I know we've got a great need with our cousins in the south, but even if we just look at the red heat map on our regional deprivation index, you'll see red spots further north. And so if it, you know, I know it's a trial, but it'd be great to spread that a little bit if we could.
So through the chair, that's when we talk about the strategic opportunities at a local level, that's where I want to get to with the local boards, to understand what those opportunities are, because I think there's probably a bit of navel gazing going on, thinking that we know all the answers, and we don't. We need to get out there and engage and figure out what they are.
And great work to see this happening will be good. We'll be able to defend ourselves a bit better now when we get attacked about this stuff. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Casey.
Well, I just wanted you to decode one line which says, working with our CCO counterparts to deliver value to the Auckland Council Group through both category streams and joint spend data.
Yes, did my notes print out on that presentation? Sorry, I don't think they were meant for the audience. So, working with my CCO counterparts, I meet monthly with my peers from water care, transport. We provide procurement shared services to the other CCOs. And our default operating model, when we're looking at categories, so that's a category will be facilities management or electricity. It's what the market has the capability to deliver to you as a category. The default approach is to say, how can this be delivered better across the group, rather than all three of us running out and doing a tender for electricity at the same time.
Thank you. Mr Mayor.
Okay.
I just had another... thank you for the answer. So that's decoded that sentence. You go.
Oh. Very quick question. So we've got major contracts, Crown, Council. Whose procurement strategy and policy prevails?
That was it. That was the next one.
There you go.
That was the next one. Yeah. I was trying to get the words out.
So it depends. Obviously, Auckland Transport must use the sourcing approach dictated by NBIE for NZTA funded works. They call it a procurement strategy. That's not a procurement strategy, that's their procurement process. So an open tender over $350,000 on gets, that's a procurement process. That's not a strategy. That's not saying that they're going to strategically and positively impact any of their outcomes. I'm currently influencing across the group to look at some of the more strategic opportunities, but from a process perspective, it depends where the money's coming from, whether it's NZTA or us.
Need to be a part of that discussion going forward on transport.
Councillor Darby.
Thanks, Dean and Sarah. Since we adopted the strategy, what sort of feedback are you getting from the creative industries, architecture, landscape architecture, who have criticised our procurement in the past? Are they filling out less forms, and what's their response?
So through the chair, the creative industry have probably had real reasons to complain in the past. You know, if you look at IT, sometimes it's faster, cheaper, better to stand up an instance of the product that you're wanting to buy than it is to write a 50-page RFP response document, right? But the processes didn't allow for that. So at the moment, because we haven't gone live with the new processes, they'll be from 1 October, we have engaged not just our internal customers but some of our suppliers in the co-design process of the new processes. So from the design industry, from architectural industry, from some of the construction industry, and they've been very happy to be part of that process, so they can see the benefit of a new contemporary approach.
Okay, good, thanks.
We're probably not capturing everyone in that engagement, but hopefully that engagement will be reflected in
The
the
Institute of
process.
Architects have been quite critical, and they're in the mix.
Yes, absolutely.
So,
Thank you. Well, it's been moved and seconded. If there's no other discussion, I will put the motion. All those in favour? Aye. Against? Carried. Thank you very much, councillors. As I say, we started with still managed to get through reasonably quickly. We started with a fire thing and we finished with the tsunami warning.
Well done, Penny.
And we actually do have a briefing downstairs in Councillors' Lounge over lunch.
Penny. Oh, sorry, Penny.
Oh, Marai protocol
Yeah.
for...
Run is here.
Yeah, I know, but we...